There's another one you don't want to hear. Frankly, do I.
1, 2, 3, set, go.
Hello out there, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Power Chord Hour podcast. Thank you so much for listening. I'm your host, Anthony Merchant, here with you with quite a fun episode right now. I wanted to jump on here before we get things going and let you know that I am talking to Marko DeSantis. You know him, you love him from Sugarcult, Bad Astronaut, The Playing Favorites, Popsicko, his short stints in the Ataris, in Swingin Utters, in all of his bands. It is he is one of those people who I've wanted on this show forever. I've been listening to him since I discovered Sugarcult in middle school, which means I've been listening to Marko and all of his bands. He's been in so many different bands that I'm a fan of for more than half my life now. Crazy. And he's someone I've wanted on the show for quite a while. And when I saw and really discovered for myself his 90s band Popsicko and the reissue of their first and only record, I thought, what better time than to have him on? I've kind of, throughout the years, I've kind of hemmed and hawed and thought of him like, he'd be a great person to have on. I enjoy his appearances on other podcasts and everything. And, just kind of waiting for a good reason to have him on. And this seemed like a good reason. And I got to tell you, as you'll hear right now, I mean, we get in depth. I mean, we talk Popsicko, but way, way more. This was an interview where, honestly, I had a list of questions in front of me, and I don't think I got past like one or two. We just talked. We had a conversation, and I had a blast. We basically just get into this, too, so that's why I wanted to jump on, because we just get into it. We don't do an intro or anything. We just get into the conversation, so I just want to jump the episode straight into that. So I wanted to jump on here and let you know that. I really hope you enjoy this. I had such a fun time with him. I mean, this thing is almost 2.5 hours long, so I'm not going to jump back on afterwards. I'm just going to let you enjoy my interview with Marko DeSantis right here on the Power Chord Hour podcast.
I met the guys in Sugarcult when they played their first show ever as just three kids attending the local community college in my hometown in Santa Barbara. And I think they saw like a flyer in like the campus center that said like needed opening band for, because Superdrag was touring on their Head Trip and Every Key record. Nice. And they didn't have their, as you know, if you study about that record, basically their major label had like totally pulled the bottom out from under them and just was like, yeah, I don't hear Sucked Out. I don't hear Who Sucked Out the Feeling. There's no single. We're gonna cut the bait on this expensive project. Yeah. And so they weren't giving him tour support. So they basically didn't have any money to have an opening band. So they were just going town to town and having like whatever local bands would play for like free beer. And so this guy Tim had assembled this little ramshackle rhythm section with this guy Ben Davis and this guy Aaron Older. And they just kind of decided to call it Sugarcult, which is a whole other story because Tim lived across the hall from a group. He was in a co-ed dorm and he lived across the hall from a group of like super butch lesbian women, yeah. Like shaved heads, like bodybuilders, and they called themselves the Sugarcult. Basically, he thought they were like, he became buddies with them and he asked him, he's like, hey, can I use that name for my band that I'm forming? And they were like, sure. We stole the name actually. And then so the origin of the name Sugarcult was actually, so it's like Tim's across the hall neighbor lesbian gang called Sugarcult. And they had stolen their name from a 60s lesbian, or maybe all girl hippie commune. I don't know if that was the name in the 60s of all girl hippie communes or if it was just one specific hippie commune, but They called themselves like an all girl hippie commune was called a Sugarcult.
Really?
Yeah.
I never would have guessed that.
I know. And once I heard that story, I was like, okay, cool. That can be our name then, because at first I was like, that's the dumbest name ever. There's already a great band called Sugar. Bob Mould from Husker Du. There's already a great band called The Cult, and like, why would you have a band called Sugar? That's like the dumbest name. But, as you realize, like most band names are actually kind of dumb. You know,
Oh my
So
God.
once you know the story behind it, it's cool. Like Iron Maiden, that sounds stupid. But then you learn that that's like a medieval torture device. And it's like, okay, that sounds kind of cool. Soundgarden. I mean, that's the dumbest name ever. You know, we're going to make, we're like, it's a bunch of, can you imagine a bunch of stoners in a rehearsal room, just all, yo, dude, we're like planting the seeds of inspiration and like watering them with distortion and growing songs, man. Yeah, dude, why don't we call our band Soundgarden? You know, it's like the dumbest name, but yet you think of Soundgarden, you're like, they're rad, you know?
Yeah, that is a good point. I would say there's a lot of bands who musically, the music is a lot better than the band name is.
Yeah, so you just grow into it. It's like your own name. It's like we don't get to choose our name, but then it just becomes who you are. And you're like, all right, that's me, you know. Motley Crue, what a dumb name. Like it literally sounds like some like elderly person scolding some kids playing in their yard. Like you're a little group of rascals and rapscallions, you little motley crew. Like it just does not sound tough or cool or edgy or dangerous or anything that's like their brand. It just sounds so quirky.
Anytime you say, if you ever hear anyone use, call somebody like a bunch of motley crew or like however the context of that, it always sounds old timey and really like not cool
called
or dangerous.
The naughty little rapscallions, you know, or just the roustabouts or something like that. Just I don't know. Anyways, I'm blabbing on and on. But the point is, the reason that Sugarcult Superdrag connection was happening is I was also in another local band at the time with the drummer of this band I had previously been in called Popsicko that I want to talk about a little bit today. Remind me, because we're just
tons of it.
Yeah, we're like releasing the long lost Popsicko record right now. But me and the drummer from Popsicko, Mick Flowers, had like kind of formed this other project with this awesome songwriter called Emil Millar, and then Mick's brother Tom Flowers, who I also play with in the band Bad Astronaut. As you're going to learn, it's a very incestuous, interconnected community that we all come from. So you got the Lap Dancers, which is me, Tom Flowers, Mick Flowers, and Emil Millar. And we're like the other local band that's like, oh yeah, we'll open for Superdrag if we can get some free beer, you know, because we liked Superdrag and we figured it'd be fun to open for them. So we're both the local opening bands. And then so Lap Dancers was going to go on second. And these kids get up there, and I happen to be the only guy in the Lap Dancers wearing like a 60s style like suit jacket, and I had this cool like Playboy tie, like this vintage tie with like the little Playboy bunnies on it. And I just, I used to sort of like dress kind of mod at the time. I was like really into like international noise conspiracy and a lot of the like, stuff that was sort of happening. And just sort of feeling that vibe. And then I see these kids get up on stage and they're all wearing suits. And the singer just like nails it. He reminds me of Elvis Costello. He's got this really cool, quirky voice. And he's got like, I don't know, he just looked cool. And he was playing like a jazz master. The other two guys were just kind of whatever. But like, I got really charmed by this guy, Tim, the singer. And he was playing the show like, like he'd been doing it for years. He was super charming on stage. He was really confident. He was just really charismatic. And, at the time I had my own little like local music radio show I would do on Sunday nights. I was just like the sort of big fish in a small pond in this little Santa Barbara local music scene. And so I went up to him afterwards. I was like, dude, you guys were great, man. We should exchange numbers, cause I do like a local music show. And he was like, dude, what's up with your, look, we were kind of like comparing like suit jackets and ties and, sorry, my dog's about to start barking, but, anyway, long story short, we kind of hit it off and I got his number, and then I just started talking to him, and he was like, man, because at the time I was actually playing bass, because I had played bass in the band Popsicko, and I'd started out on guitar when I was a kid, but I eventually just graduated to playing bass. There goes my dog. So, and then I wanted to interview the guy from Sugarcult, and all he did was talk about Superdrag, and I had to listen to his dog bark, and it just didn't go very well.
I gotta ask you, because I did hear you call him Iggy. I mean, is he named after Iggy?
No, it's Kiki. It's not.
Oh,
Iggy,
I heard
Kiki.
you wrong. I heard you wrong.
Iggy would be a pretty cool name for a dog, man. Maybe next dog. Maybe that's a good name. Although, damn, you just reminded me. I'm trying to. Iggy Pop's playing in LA like next month, and I'm like dead set on going. I've seen him once. but it's like, I'm just on this, it's just part of my quest as a lifelong rock and roll fan. It's like, I need to see a proper Iggy show, and I really want to meet him. Like, I mean, he's getting up there, so I really want to meet him while he's still walking the earth,
Oh, absolutely.
But he's doing a really cool tour right now. He's got Duff from Guns N' Roses playing bass, and Chad from the Chili Peppers playing drums, and this other dude named Watt playing guitar. It's going to sound really good,
Oh yeah, no, I would definitely. He's one I've never seen live. I would absolutely. That's one of those ones where, yeah, if he's near you, I mean, you got to say you saw Iggy Pop live. I mean,
yeah, totally. I saw him once. He played with the Foo Fighters at this festival, and so I was on the side of the stage while he was playing, which was kind of cool to sort of see him up close. And I saw him like sitting down on a chair, like resting before he went on stage. I mean, he's very old. He's kind of crooked. He's just hanging on by he's like held together by duct tape at this point. But I think that's part of the beauty of him is he's gonna go down swinging,
Oh yeah, no, he's one of those ones who might die on stage. That's a guy he's performing till the end. I feel like.
Oh yeah, he's definitely going down swinging. But yeah, so eventually Tim and I we just kind of became pals over the phone, and he was like, "Man, it's too bad I didn't meet you like before I got this other guy playing bass," and because I feel like we just like finish each other's sentences, and we just kind of, we were like turning each other on to music and like talking about stuff. Those like, I always say those things you see on people's Instagram feeds that say like, I like you because we hate the same things, like we sort of had that dynamic with each other. We both would like commiserate about stuff we thought was cool or lame. And it's just one of those things. It was kind of a little bromance. And then it was like, I think we were both thinking the same thing, like, damn, I wish you didn't already have a bass player. And I was like, damn, I wish I wasn't already in this other band. And then this other band I was playing in just sort of petered out. And I was definitely like, I had like, we'll get into it later, but like I had this band in the early 90s called Popsicko that almost pulled it off. Like we made this amazing record and we had this, really great run for a while. And then that band ended sort of tragically because our singer died. And then I had this like sort of wilderness period where I kind of played in a bunch of bands that never really amounted to anything. And I started kind of running an indie record label with my buddy Joey Cape, who I would later play in Bad Astronaut with, Joey Cape being the lead singer of the band Lagwagon, who are also from our hometown. And Joey was just someone who I'd known from the scene. I mean, he was kind of the older kid when we were all growing up, and you'd sort of see him around, and, it's like in a small town, everyone who plays music just knows each other. It's just like, Joey had asked me, cause he knew I was kind of the guy that made all the phone calls in the bands I was in. And he asked me like, hey, I want to start this label. Would you kind of run it for me? Cause you seem kind of organized and whatever. And I was like, all right, sure. So I basically just dove in the deep end and started running this label. And then we put out the first record we actually put out a compilation, but
Happy Meals.
What's that?
Was it Happy Meals?
Yeah.
Yeah. On vinyl.
The label was called My Records. And one of the bands, it's funny because I had started like doing this part-time job, like screen printing t-shirts. And the guy who I was working with was my old friend who I had actually played in a band with when I was in high school. This guy named Steve Sherlock. And he was like, dude, I've got this new project I'm doing with this guy, Perry, and check it out. And he played me their first demo. And I was like, dude, this is really good. I should play this for Joey and see if he wants to put you on like the compilation or whatever. So basically, long story short, we ended up putting their song on the compilation and then talking about having them be the first band on the label. And we Joey wanted to do a single with them, like a 7-inch. And I was like, I kind of convinced him. I was like, dude, if we're going to go to all the trouble of like setting up drums and microphones and everything, because Joey's going to produce it, I was like, to go to the hassle of recording them for a single, you might as well, you've got everything set up, you might as well just record a full length record. It's actually probably cheaper to press up CDs than to press up vinyl 7 inches. And so we ended up going for it and putting out and making this full length record with this local band called Nerf Herder.
Yes.
And
amazing,
then it was completely crazy. So this was like after Popsicko and before Sugarcult. I had this weird little moment in time where I was like making phone calls and just hustling like a maniac to try and get this Nerf Herder record off the ground. And we got it like just as a total fluke. We got the song Van Halen on, we got some station in Northern California in San Francisco to play it. And they played it once and the phone never stopped ringing. And so suddenly they were like, it just lit a wildfire. Like my whole life was like, I just went from being some like kid in my underwear, in my parents' house, like making phone calls in my teenage bedroom, to all of a sudden like getting like limousines picking me up and flying me to New York City and meeting with Clive Davis, the like music industry legend, and like helping this. I was basically acting as their manager, and we got them like this huge major label record deal. And they basically bought them off our label. You know, we ended up getting them like a $250,000 record deal. And like literally from the seat of our pants. I mean, Joey was on tour with Lagwagon in Europe, and I'm like, you know, trying to call him because back then we didn't all have iPhones and everything. So it was really hard to get in touch, trying to find him on tour. And I'm like, dude, you got to like, we only pressed up like 2,000 copies of this. We're going to run out of them. You got to like, you know, so he took a loan from his like family and like pressed up a bunch of copies. And then I don't know, it was this crazy runaway train with the Nerf Herder record. And they ended up getting signed to a bigger label. And so that was this crazy little moment after Popsicko and before Sugarcult. After around that time, I'd started like doing sort of like touring gigs with other bands that already existed. Like the kid Chris Rowe moved to town.
Yeah.
And he had our friend Derek that I'd grown up with in the same neighborhood, Derek Plord, who was the original drummer of Lagwagon. He had him play on this record because he had gotten signed by Joe Escalante from the Vandals. Had started a label called Kung Fu Records. And literally Chris was the kid who would like go to all the shows. He grew up in like bumfuck middle of nowhere in Indiana on the outskirts of you know, I can't remember what city. I think he grew up.
I think it's Anderson, isn't it?
Anderson. Yeah. And I apologize if Anderson's like some major metropolitan city. I'm calling it like, you're like, I'm like the obnoxious guy from Southern California. It's fucking bumfuck nowhere, man. Anderson, Indiana. Someone's listening to this going, fuck you, dude. You know, I'm like 5th generation Anderson right now. Anyway, sorry. Respect.
You angered the entire metropolitan area of Anderson.
Yeah, exactly. Hi, Anderson. Marko from Sugarcult here. Can we still be friends? Anyway, so Chris had like literally would just go to shows. He was just so ambitious. He would make little demos in his like he'd get into his car and like run an extension cord from his house into his car and roll the window up on the extension cord and then have a 4-track, and he would make his demos because he was too embarrassed to sing in front of his parents. So he would like park the car as far away from the house as he could get away with, run the extension cord, and then make his demos in his car. And then he would take those demos and just any band that would come through, like, you know, he would drive wherever. I know Chris Rowe's a great story. You should get him on your show.
I would love to.
Yeah. If you look on the back of Dookie, the original Dookie Green Day record, and there's like Ernie from Sesame Street. I think they had to take it off because of legal reasons.
I have the OG copy of it.
In the crowd, one of the kids in that crowd is Chris Rowe from the Ataris. He's got sort of long blonde hair. I could show you a picture of it. You'd trip out. He's also in the picture on the cover of an Avail record where where you can see a crowd. It's kind of fun.
Where is he in the Avail record? Oh my God!
I'll show you at some point. I gotta figure out.
I probably own these records. I mean, I definitely own.
And you're gonna trip out. Chris is like, dude. If it like between me and Chris, we're like Forrest Gump of music history. It's like we've been everywhere.
He's never been on this show, but he did pick, and I don't remember what it was because it was years ago. But I do twit picks, and I'd ask like musicians on Twitter what song to pick, and he picked a Husker Du song, and I wish I could remember what one, but then he gave me a whole story of and I'm forgetting his name, but the guy who produced So Long Astoria, they picked him because he produced all the Husker Du and Sugar stuff, and that's the whole reason.
Yeah, that would be Gil Norton, I think.
Gil Norton, yeah, he gave me the whole story. Like, he gave me this whole rundown on why they picked Gil, because I mean, obviously he's a huge Husker and just a Bob Golden general fan. I
love Chris, man. When he and I start talking, we can talk for miles. You know, we just feed off each other, but he's such a rock and roll romantic. I love that about him. I mean, I think it's just one of those things, like you find people like that and you're like, especially when he became successful, I was just like rooting for him so hard because I'm like, this guy just loves it. And it's such a great story because he went really from like a kid with like zero prospects in life to, you know, someone who's just living the dream. You know, it's pretty awesome. But anyway, so for a little while he moved to town because Derek had played, like I said, Derek had basically kind of been hired to play drums on the record because basically he passed out his demo tape to bands that would come through town, and he gave one to Joe from the Vandals, and most of the time when kids in local bands give touring bands their demo tapes or CDs or whatever it might be back then, most of the time, they don't really get listened to,
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes they do. Like we would compile, I would collect them all, and then I would put them on our merch table, maybe if I got a bunch on the East Coast, I'd put them on our merch table in Europe. Or if I got a bunch in the South, I'd put them on our merch table in the Pacific Northwest. I'd sort of try to help spread the word, at least get
nice.
Yeah. And it was kind of cool.
Idea.
I knew, I was like, we're not going to probably listen to much of this stuff, but at least I'm going to distribute it. And I sort of had a little box on our merch table that would say free, new music, it's just, once in a while you'd listen to it. And if it was really bad, you'd give it what we used to call the CD release party.
Oh no. What is the CD release? No, but I can only imagine.
On the road, just in the van, going 80 miles an hour. You just roll the window down, just the CD release party. If it was really bad. Now, sometimes if we were really bored, our singer would pick up the phone and call the number on the back of the CD.
Oh, God.
And he'd call them and he would just roast him. He'd be like, "What the fuck, dude? You guys sound just like Blink-182. The last thing we need is another band that sounds just like Blink-182. Do better. You got to fucking work harder." And then he'd just be like, "I'm just kidding," and he would laugh with them and joke with them. But it's just something to do when you're bored on the road. Anyways, so I'm jumping all over the place. I promise I'll tie this all together. So you have Chris eventually getting a deal with Kung Fu Records because Joe actually listened to the tape and was like, "Oh my God, who are you guys?" His story is great because he called Chris at his home number. And Chris thought it was his friend playing a joke. He was like, "Gee, fuck you, man. You're not Joe from the Vandals, And then he called back. He's like, "No, I'm serious. It's Joe from the Vandals, and I want to put your record out. This is great." Problem was, he had called it the Ataris, but it was basically just him. He was just a one-man band. So he had to create some story "Oh, well, we just lost our drummer, and I'm just not sure if And so Joe was like, "Okay, well, Derek had just recently been, parted ways with Lagwagon. So he was around and he was a great drummer. So Joe asked Derek if he would go play on this Ataris record that he was going to put out. And Derek did it. And then eventually I think Derek moved to Indiana to keep playing with them because he just liked the songs. And then as soon as he got to Indiana, he was like, "Okay, I can't hang. I got to get back to California." And so Derek was like, "Yo, dude, I'll still play in your band, but you got to move to California if you want to keep playing with me." And so Chris was like, "Okay." He just threw all his stuff in his backpack and just packed up his guitar and just followed Derek to Santa Barbara. And I met him the day he got to Santa Barbara. We were at this
wow.
There's this place called Isla Vista, which is kind of the college town next to the UCSB. And they would have these free shows in this park in IV. And at the time, I remember it was a band called The Other. Do you remember them?
No, I don't think I've heard of them actually.
Okay, they were Fat Records had a sort of smaller label called Honest Dons. Okay?
I've heard of Honest Dons, yeah.
So The Other, I believe, was maybe the first release on Honest Dons, and it was basically all the members of the band RKL. But instead of with the singer Jason singing, it was with their original drummer Bomber playing bass and singing and writing the songs. Really? So it was really progressive and intricate, crazy, kind of an extension of RKL, that sort of really kind of proggy hardcore punk, right? And they were great. The Other, and they played with another band that had been recently signed to Honest Dons that was from my hometown as well, called the Mad Caddies.
Oh yeah, obviously the Mad Caddies.
Right? So they would grow up to be a big, pretty successful band. So you have The Other and the Mad Caddies playing the Ivy Park. So we're all just out there because that's just where everyone would hang out. If there was a free show, it was a no-brainer. Just people hanging out during the day, drinking beer and talking to their friends. And I get this high-strung kid come up to me. He's like, "Hey, dude, I just moved to Santa Barbara today, and my name's Chris, and I heard you're friends with Derek, and I heard you play bass, and we got some tour dates coming up. Would you want to play bass for us?" And so I was like, same kind of thing. I was like, "All right," it's just there was no fancy auditions or anything like that. Just I was probably a couple beers in, and I'm like, "Yeah, it sounds like fun. Let's go." When are the tour dates? He's like this. I'm like, "Oh yeah, sure. Let's do it." And so I was like, so basically I joined the Ataris, and I got to play in the Ataris for a little while. And again, I was kind of licking my wounds in this wilderness period after Popsicko and sort of during my records. So I started playing with the Ataris. And while I was playing in the Ataris, I remember we were in New York City. Derek and I had gone to New York to sort of help promote the Ataris and just hang out during this festival they would have called CMJ. It was like sort of a music industry festival. And our friends, this guy, Jesse Mallon, who used to be in a band called Degeneration, he owned a bar back then. It was kind of a club called Coney Island High. And he was having a show there with it was like Me First and the Gimme Gimmes, I think, headlined, which is like sort of the, Fat Records super group with like Fat Mike and Joey from Lagwagon and Chris, who would go on to be in the Foo Fighters and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, they were playing, and the band that opened for them was the Swingin Utters. And I noticed that the Swingin Utters, when they played, I'd met them before, and I noticed that their guitar player, Max, was playing bass. And I was like, I went up to him afterwards. I was like, dude, what's going on? How come you're playing bass? And he's like, oh, our bass player just left. He's like, he's going to just, he just got his master's degree and he's going to like get a job or whatever. And I was like, again, probably a couple beers in. And I just like borrowed some girl's eyeliner and like wrote my number down on a cocktail napkin. And I was like, dude, I'll fucking play bass for you, man. I love your band. Here's my number. Like, and he's like, seriously? I was like, yeah, dude, call me up sometime. I'd love to like, I'll fill in for you guys until you can find someone or whatever, And he's like, okay. And I just sort of forgot about it. And he kind of probably forgot about it. And so I'm on tour with the Ataris in California, finishing up this tour. I think we were out with No Use for a Name, opening for No Use for a Name. And we were like the opening band. So we would like finish our last song and be like, all right, guys, this is our last song. We're the Ataris from Santa Barbara. If anyone has a place for us to stay, hit us up. We'll be hanging out over by the merch. That was like our shtick pretty much every show. And we'd hope to find someone where we could like stay at their house, do our laundry, ransack their refrigerator. Sometimes we couldn't find anyone. We'd have to just sleep in our shitty van, or we'd sleep on the stage with sleeping bags, like at the venue we played. We didn't have any money. So we were just like, I remember we used to coast the van down like long. If there was a long grade on a freeway, we would like put the van in neutral. So we would like save gas, and just, we were just making it work, dude. And of course, this was way before the Ataris had like the big hit on the radio. This was like on their first record, Anywhere But Here. And I'll tell you, like, this is kind of dark, but like when I was in Popsicko, one of the reasons that band kind of like sadly came to an end was because our singer had become strung out. He had picked up a drug habit. And so I had gone through that, where I'd been like, man, we're like so close. We're like playing shows with Green Day and Weezer, and all these things are happening, and we're getting looked at by record companies. And then our singer's just going worse down the drain in drug addiction. It's getting worse and worse and worse. And eventually led to him dying in a car accident. So I had this real chip on my shoulder about like drug addicts. I was just like, I had seen so many friends in my hometown go down that road. Heroin was really big at the time in the 90s, with Nirvana and all this stuff. That this sort of culture was like, it was like coffee, heroin, flannels, and that was just in the air. It was like so it was really hard to avoid if you're the kind of person that was susceptible to picking that kind of a thing up. And unfortunately, Derek, who I'd grown up with, who had, like I said, had been playing in Lagwagon, he had unfortunately gotten addicted to the same thing. So I'm in, and here's someone I've known Derek since we were like the same kids in a neighborhood. We started our first band together. I taught him how to play bass so he could be the bass player in my original punk band that I had called Illiterate. And then like, he's just one of those kids, like you teach him how to play bass so he can play with you. And within 2 weeks, he's better than you at guitar and bass, and better than your drummer at drums, and is already like learning how to write songs. You're just like, he's one of those guys. Like, he's a fucking genius, Sad truth is the two people I know that died from heroin were both two of the most brilliant genius, like literally certifiable geniuses I've ever known. Derek from Lagwagon and Keith from Popsicko. So you want to believe that only happens to like the fuck up, but which wouldn't make it any sweeter. But it happens to like the brilliant, multi-talented, like charismatic, good-looking, intelligent, intellectual, amazing people, which sucks, it's such a loss, Kurt Cobain, there you go. Right. So
it's rough.
Jimi Hendrix, it happens to the best of the best. But anyway, so Derek was, while I was touring with the Ataris, I just sort of had this like oh man, this is so hard. It's hard on two levels. It's reminding me of Popsicko and Keith. It's also just heartbreaking to see this like kid who was like the all-star kid in our neighborhood. Like he was better than everybody at skateboarding, better than anybody at talking to girls, better than anybody at writing, better than anybody at, playing music. Like to see him just like kind of suffering from that disease. I was like, I started sleeping with one eye open. I was like, I got to get the fuck out of here. Like the band was struggling. Chris was insanely talented, but he was super young. He was like 19. He's super immature, always ran out of money, always like, very irresponsible. He'd like lose his guitar and lose his shoes, I was like parenting him, I was like, I can't like supervise a drug addict and try to be the like, older brother to a kid who's like just straight off the turnip truck, And so I started looking for other things. I was definitely sorry. Yeah, you're getting it all. Now the male person's here. You're getting the day in the life here. I should have just gone into my studio. Anyway, man. So I was kind of thinking like, nothing about this. I already felt kind of weird because I was like filling in a band that already had a record. It's not like I played on the record or made up the songs. I just was like, I don't know if this is it. I was searching for what my next move was going to be. And I wanted it to work. I liked being in the Ataris. I loved, playing with those guys, and the tours we were on were fun. We got to tour with MXPX and the Vandals and Lagwagon and No Use for a Name. We did some fun shows, but it was like, I was like, this is kind of a road to nowhere. I remember the van broke down and no one had any money. So I had to put it on my credit card. And so I made Chris like sign the name of the van over to me. So I would like at least like have some collateral to know that they would pay me back. And during that time we were playing a show, and we were about 45 minutes away from my parents' house in Santa Barbara. So I was like, you guys, instead of sleeping on the floor or sleeping in some random person's house, let's just drive 45 minutes to my parents' house. And like, we can have like a nice, comfortable, we can take showers, we can do our laundry. My mom will make us breakfast. Like we'll have like a nice, comfortable time and just kind of, refresh ourselves till we get to the next show. And so while I was at home, this is dating myself here, because this is so long ago. I literally had like an answering machine that I would have to like call, kids, before you had voicemail on your iPhones, you had to call your answering machine, which had a little micro cassette thing in it, and you had to like check your messages. So I get home and I like check my messages, and it's just like, hey, Marco, this is Max from the Swingin Utters. I just found your number, and just remember following up on what we talked about in New York, like a month ago. Are you still down to go on tour with us as our bass player? And I was like, oh shit, I forgot about that, And he's like, no pressure, but we do leave in like 10 days. So let me know if you're down, because we'd love to have you. And so I call him back and I'm like, yeah, dude, what's up? Like, what songs should I learn? And he's like, he told me the songs to learn. And actually he needed, like, the rest of the guys in his band had never met me before. So they were like skeptical as to whether I could even like handle it, So he's like, do you have like any sample of a recording you've ever played on that you can like send us, so I can just like, kind of like calm the other guys in the band that you're going to be okay? And so I actually had a copy of Popsicko's CD that we put out, and I like just dropped that in the mail and sent it to him. And I spent the rest of the Ataris tour like in the van with a little mini acoustic guitar, just like listening with like a CD Discman, listening to the Swingin Utters, music, and learning, figuring out their songs, making myself little cheat sheets. And I, just as luck would have it, the Ataris tour ended. The last show of the tour was in San Francisco, because we were touring with No Use for a Name, and they're from up there. So it would naturally end there. And so basically we were going to play that show and get in the van the next day and drive all the way back to Santa Barbara, which is where we lived. But instead I was like, this is kind of perfect. It ends in San Francisco 3 days before the Swingin Utters leave for Europe. So I literally just had the Ataris, like I got an address from Max, and I had the Ataris drop me off in like this super dangerous neighborhood in like the Mission in San Francisco with my bass and like my suitcase. And I was just like, all right, see you guys later, and I just like left the band and like knocked on some door, and some girl who's like covered in tattoos answered. And I was like, hey, what's up? I'm, is Max here? And she's like, oh, I don't know. Is Max here? They're like, no, he's at someone's house. I'm like, oh, okay. And they're like, I guess you can come in. I'm like, okay, thanks. It was so awkward. I'm like, what am I doing with my life? She's like in some random punk rock house in San Francisco with my gear. And then eventually Max gets back and I'm like, yo, dude, what's up? Like, so we're going to do this. And he's like, yeah, here's the thing, man. About the whole rehearsal thing, like our drummers like want to spend time with his girlfriend before we leave. So we're probably not going to rehearse tonight after all. So we just ended up getting drunk and hanging out. And then the next night, he's like, we're going to rehearse the next night, though. Don't worry. The next night comes around. He's like, oh, yeah. Dude, I think our guitar player's got something going on with his buddies. So, like, I guess we're probably not going to rehearse tonight. And I'm like, okay. So that leaves us one more night. And so on the last night before we left, we got together and rehearsed. And I we barely ran the set like once. And I had like ramshackle cheat sheets. I had written out for like 20 songs or something, maybe more, maybe like 25 songs. And they're all super short songs and they're somewhat similar. So it's really easy to get them mixed up. And I basically got to run the songs with them like once or twice, maybe. Right. And like maybe Darius would help me like, oh, dude, you're just doing that one thing. And then it was on my own and they were on a separate flight than me. So like basically the next day it was like they're gone to like flying to Berlin. And then I'm on a separate flight just by myself. And I spent the whole flight listening to their CD and just like going over it in my head. And then we get there. And that night we had a gig, sold out show we were actually touring with No Use for Name, which is another story I'll tell you about. And it was a sold out show in Berlin. And it was just crazy people, and I barely knew the songs. And I'm up there just playing to this 300 kids just going crazy. And I'm like, I have like my little like yellow, like legal pad with like the songs with like a Sharpie with little like reminders and notes. And I'm trying to follow it. And it was just a total exercise in just like using the force. You just had to kind of like, go for it and just hope it worked out. It worked out. We played 48 shows in 50 days.
Holy shit.
So it was, and we toured in a bus, which was amazing. I had never even set foot in a bus, but it wasn't a fancy tour bus, but in Europe, it just made more sense because, we covered a lot of ground. We went all over Europe and the UK, even Eastern Europe. We played in Poland, played in Prague. It was awesome, but it was basically our band. So it was me and the Swingin Utters with No Use for Name. And then kind of sharing a lot of crew. So it was just all of us. It was just like it was so much fun, man. It was just like, and we're all really good friends. Like this is name droppy, but my friend from growing up, remember I told you I'd played in a band with the drummer of Nerf Herder. So that band was a band in high school called Lost Kittens. And the guitar player of that band was Chris Shiflett.
Oh, so, nice.
Who's now, in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Foo Fighters guy. But back then he was in No Use for Name as their guitar player. So Chris and I had played in a band all through high school together, moved to LA together to try to like pull it off. Like this was before Popsicko. And then we eventually went our separate ways. He did his thing. I did my thing. And here we are on tour in Europe. Both of us, our first time ever in Europe together on tour. And we're like sharing a bus. And we're just like, it was we still all talk about it today. We're like, dude, we've all toured for like 25 years since then. And like that tour is like, is like burned in our hearts as far as like just such an amazing moment we'll never forget. So we just had so much fun. And it was just like every night was just a raging party. But anyways, I get home from that and I was like, still kind of soul searching. I'm like, well, the Ataris was cool. Swingin Utters is cool, but they're already such an established band. I don't really feel like being the hired gun in someone else's band, and just from hanging out with them internally, it felt like they were kind of on their last legs. It felt like they had sort of run their course. They were like, yeah, dude, we're making this other record and then we're going to see what happens. Like all the guys were working day jobs to try and like, they certainly weren't making money, they weren't like, and I just felt like I'm not going to uproot myself from Santa Barbara and move all the way to San Francisco just to play in a band that seems to be like falling apart, even though I love the band and I love the guys. So I was just like, and by the way, they had already promised two other guys that they could play bass on the record they were about to make. So I didn't even have that. I was like, well, if I'm not going to get to play on the new record, and it just didn't seem like, I was like, this was fun. Let's just call it what it was. I think I played like one more show with them in San Francisco. And then I was like, okay, guys, this is fun, but I'm going to do something else. And then the same thing happened. Nerf Herder, about a year later, ironically, because I had a connection with them from helping them, they had needed a bass player to fill in. And I jumped in Nerf Herder for a while to go to Europe. We had this gig in Europe where we did 2 weeks in Paris, 2 weeks in Madrid. Super fun. And of course, we were all really good friends. So that was super fun. And then it was the same thing where like I was enjoying playing with them and I did some shows with them. But then I just had this moment where I was like, I was also doing that band, The Lap Dancers, around the same time. And I was just kind of like thinking to myself, how much longer am I going to do this, man? I've been doing this shit since I was like 13 years old. And I've had these near close things like Popsicko that almost got there. Lost Kittens even got like pretty popular. And that I've played in some of these bands. And I just was sort of thinking, I was like, I don't know, maybe I think I verbalized it. I was like, maybe I'm just done. Maybe I'm just trying too hard. Maybe I should just like stop doing this. It's just like, I don't even know if it's that fun anymore. It just seems like it's just a constant hustle. And I just felt like it was this moment where I was just sort of having this like existential crisis. Just like, I don't know, what the hell am I doing? Nothing seems to be panning out. And around that time is when, like literally practically right when I verbalized that I was going to quit playing music, like quit trying to play music professionally, is when I met Tim.
Good timing.
So it's like, and then he was like, dude, I wish I would have met you because we already have a bass player. And then one day he calls me up. He's like, hey, just random question. Do you know how to play guitar? And I was like, yeah, I started out on guitar. I sort of know how to play guitar. And he's like, well, because I'm just thinking we should be a 4-piece, and, they'd been doing some gigs around town as a 3-piece. And he just was like, I can't handle playing guitar parts while I'm singing. So like, would you want to try playing? And I was like, totally, man. That sounds like fun. Again, I can't quit music if I try. So I justified to myself. I was like, well, I'm not getting back in the game because I'm just doing this to just like, it's just going to be fun to try to play guitar and like, sort of like, it give me an excuse to like hang out with some of these guys and I like their songs and I get along with them and it'll be fun for me to like play guitar, like play electric guitar rather than just sitting on my bed with an acoustic or whatever. So I went into it with like zero expectations that it would go anywhere because the band was like nothing. Sugarcult was nothing. It was just a shitty little local band playing like the dive bar. And so I just got in there with them and then it was so weird. It's like everything I had been hoping and wishing for in other bands I had been in that never really went anywhere. Like these guys they had this like incredible, like work ethic. Like I was never the guy who was like, let's go home early. I was always the guy, hey, you want to run the set one more time? And then other guys would be like, dude, I'm tired. I'm out, and I would be like, oh, come on, let's work on something new. And these guys had that thing. Like they were like, let's keep going. I'm not tired. Are you tired? And they had this like military discipline. Like the drummer would record us practicing and then we'd go outside and take a break, but listen to the recording and like take notes and be like, dude, you're fucking up that one part. What's that part? And then we drill that part like 100 times till we got it right. None of us were very good at music, but we just like outworked everybody else. We were like, we will drill this shit like 100 times, drill the verse 100 times, drill the chorus 100 times, drill the little guitar part 100 times, and then snap it all together and play it. And it's going to sound pretty good. And now let's work on what we're going to do between the songs. And so we really had this, what are we going to wear? How is the flyer going to look? What's our, and we cared about, it was like this weird dynamic in Sugarcult in the early days where we had this like internal competition, like where we would like get to practice that night and be like, I made a phone call for the band to try to get a gig. And the other guy would be like, oh yeah, well, I made stickers. And the other guy would be like, well, I wrote a new part. And, like we just had this, like, who wants this more, like healthy competition. And then things just like started really slow, but then they started to catch fire. And then before you knew it, we were like becoming like the biggest band in our hometown. And then we'd start going down to LA and it started happening there. And for me, it reminded me of my previous band Popsicko, because we had done the same thing. We started here and then we became pretty big, And so I was like, I had that feeling where I was like, I've seen this movie before. So this time I want to do it right, and I'm not going to, I'm going to make sure we like, don't make some of the same mistakes or whatever. And I'm really like emboldened me to go for it. Cause especially since I had that sort of attitude where I was like, I'm already making peace with being done with my whole struggle of going for it. So like, this is just sort of like the shot clock, Hail Mary, see what happens, but kind of nothing to lose. So I might as well just like empty the tank and go for it one last time. And, but Tim and the bass player Aaron were a couple years younger, and that was their first band ever. They had never really been in a band before. So, so we had the drummer Ben had been in a band before. He'd sort of quit music already and like just focused on becoming like, he was trying to build his own recording studio and be an engineer. And that's how he got in the band with Tim, because Tim had hired him to record Tim's demos, and then found out that he could play drums. So he asked Ben if Ben would play drums on the demos since he was recording him anyway. And then from that, he was like, dude, you should just be our drummer, And the funny thing is Tim had started out on drums when he was in high school, and he still had his drum kit, but he owed Ben a bunch of money because he like said, hey, I'll pay you to like record me. But then he like didn't have the money to pay him. So basically he said, how about this? I'll just give you my drum set as like pay. And Ben was like, okay, cool. And so he got a drum kit, and then they started playing together. And that's basically how Sugarcult started. Wow. It was just Tim with some songs, hired Ben to record them, ran out of money. So he had to give Ben his drum kit. And then because Ben had a drum kit and could play drums, Ben played drums. And then they just like, I think Aaron was the kid who sat next to him in class, and Tim would cheat off of his whatever, like paper, his test or whatever. Yeah. And so eventually he asked Aaron to play bass. And then again, he found me at that Superdrag show and asked me eventually if same thing. I was on a road trip, and I get a voicemail saying, hey dude, give me a call. I have a question for you. And I call him, and he's like, would you want to play guitar? And that's kind of how it came together. And then we just kept going. And next 2 years later, we got a record deal, got on the Warped Tour, got a song on the radio. And it was just like, really for about 10 years, it was like a nonstop ascent. And it was pretty amazing for me because like I said, before Sugarcult, I had prematurely sort of declared my retirement, so it really is that day is darkest before the dawn story where you're like, you never know,
It's wild too. I mean, like you brought up, like to think of that, like, I mean, cause like we're just talking about all these bands you've been in, and that, Sugarcult's far from your first time around. But then having two other guys who that's their first band, I mean, you guys huge. I mean, that's a crazy first band to be in. So it's so funny to like see your story and then be in all these bands and then blow up with Sugarcult. And then a couple of those guys like, oh yeah, it's just our first band. And then you do all these things with it. Like, kind of an anomaly too. I don't feel like most people's first bands can say they got to do a lot of those things.
Well, I think most bands, having been in so many bands, I think the magic of a band is, and this sounds so trite and kind of cliche, but like, I think what makes a band magic is that a band is usually bigger than the sum of its parts. It's this weird chemistry thing that happens. It's not just here's some songs and here's someone who could play bass, and someone who could play drums, and someone who could, it's all that weird, like kind of undefinable somethings that sort of just happen, and it makes it like, I mean, it's like a relationship. You don't just go, that's a man, that's a woman. They both, that thing fits in that thing. Great. Now they're going to get along. It's like any guy and any girl can have sex, but not any guy and any girl can be in love, and have a rapport and have a relationship and be able to handle, all the twists and turns. So it really is like, it's not just any old person who has opposable thumbs can play bass and like learn the parts. It's like, it needs to be the right person, the right amount of tension, the right amount of sort of, give and rock and roll and the whole thing. And then when it works, but it doesn't usually work forever. That's what's so extraordinary about bands like the Rolling Stones, where you're like, you go see them play just to like say you saw the Rolling Stones, and then you see them and they blow your fucking mind, You know, like you would be happy to just see them be alive and hear the songs be sort of played, but they like deliver, and it's like transcendent. You're like, holy shit, it's like fucking spiritual. You know, that's why I'm going to see Iggy Pop. It's like,
Yes.
you would just be happy to know you were in the same room as the guy who basically inadvertently invented punk rock. But then you also get to see him and you go, oh, no wonder. No wonder he gets to be Iggy Pop. No wonder he's so like, very rarely are you disappointed when you see these like so-called legends. Yeah, I saw David Bowie once and it was like, holy shit. Like it blows your mind. It blows your mind. So anyway, I'm not putting Sugarcult in the same level as that, but I do think that part of our chemistry was that we had someone like me who had been in a few bands before and had that perspective. I had even been on tour before. So I had to like, hey guys, I sort of know how this works on a micro professional way. Had run my own label before, I definitely had some industry contacts and some experience, but then we had our drummer who was just kind of a music guy. He was like an engineer. He was a multi-instrumentalist, and he had already kind of made peace with like, okay, well, I used to play in bands, but now I'm just going to do this. So he wasn't like trying too hard. He was just like, I'll play drums, but I'm like this, this isn't like my dream, I'm trying to go for here. I'll just do this because I'm in a boring local small town and it's something to do. But then you had our singer, Tim, who had that still like childish, like fantasy of like, dude, it would be so fun to be a rock and roll star, like just like the way you're a kid standing on your bed with your tennis racket, like, playing along to Kiss or something like that. So he had that sort of like exuberance and excitement about it. And our bass player, Aaron, was, he brought his own skill set. He was actually probably the only guy in our band who was a really accomplished musician. Like he had been like classically trained in opera when he was a kid, and he knew all the harmony and theory. And so it was like really good to have someone like that in the band, because we would just be playing all this chaos, and then we'd look at him and he'd be like, I don't think you can do that at the same time as that, bro. And you'd be like, are you sure? And he'd be like, well, here's why. So like it was good to have one guy in the band to sort of like be that guy. And he could sing. His harmonies were really key for our band. But anyway, the point I'm making is having two guys that had never been in a band, so they didn't have all that baggage and experience, and then having two guys that had some professional experience. So me and Ben were like a couple years older than Tim and Aaron. It reminded me of, and this is obnoxious of me to put ourselves even in the same sentence as Led Zeppelin, but it kind of reminded me of when I was a kid. I read that book, Hammer of the Gods, which is the story of Led Zeppelin. It's a great book.
Okay, yeah.
And when you learn about Led Zeppelin, you remember that Jimmy Page, the guitar player, and John Paul Jones, the bass player, were like accomplished. Like Jimmy Page had been in the Yardbirds. John Paul Jones had been like the like first call session bass player in the London scene and throughout the 60s. Like he played on tons of records. So you have John Paul Jones and Jimmy Page, who were like highly decorated veterans of the London blues scene. And then you have John Bonham and Robert Plant, who were like these two like hippy dippy kids from like the northern country that was like, they grew up in like, so it's like the equivalent of like, you got two city guys that were like accomplished and experienced, and then two guys from the countryside that were like younger and they just had no idea what was going on. They joined forces together, and that's Led Zeppelin. So I always thought that similar dynamic happened with Sugarcult. You have like two guys that had like the young sort of innocence, and then two guys that had a little bit of experience. You put those things together and you get Sugarcult. So basically Sugarcult and Led Zeppelin are the same thing. So basically Sugarcult wrote Stairway to Heaven. No, I'm just joking.
Hey, that is basically, I mean.
See what I did there?
Yeah. Basically, yeah, you are. I mean,
basically, I'm Jimmy Page. Yeah, that's
the Led Zeppelin of the 2000 of the 21st century.
The Led Zeppelin of pop punk. Okay.
I feel like that's going on a T-shirt. Feel like that needs to be on there.
Yeah, that's it.
I mean, I love it, man, because like you have. I mean, like we're just going through. I mean, it's insane the amount of bands you've played throughout the years, and I mean all of that too. Because I want to talk some Popsicko with you. And like, again, going where like Sugarcult is, where I jump on with you. I mean, in the early 2000s and stuff, I mean, seeing you guys watching Fuse and seeing the videos and you're getting into that way, and then getting into Bad Astronaut, getting into the Ataris, finding out you were in the Ataris and stuff like that. But Popsicko, I'm just learning now, but like this rich history you had, I think a lot of people who might look at Sugarcult, maybe they don't assume it's your first band, but they might think of it like they don't realize you have this huge history long before Sugarcult. You know what I mean? Like,
they think of you as Sugarcult, but shit, you have this really long, there's a big journey to get to Sugarcult before you even get to that.
Well, Anthony, you know, it's hard when you're so goddamn handsome and you look so young. You know, people assume that Sugarcult was my first band and I was just a little 16-year-old kid, you know. But yeah, no, it's I think that the funny thing is I just started really early, you know, and so it's weird. It's like I got a really early start, but then I turned out to be a late bloomer. So what happens by virtue of that is you have this enormous like ramp that leads up. Like I said, like right around the time like I was kind of coming to my senses in my young adulthood, I'm like, you know what, this has been great, but I gotta fucking get real here and maybe like, you know, get a haircut and get a real job. You know what I mean? And you know, but then Sugarcult came along. It was like, hey, I'm still young enough to do this. Let's do this, right? And honestly, I just feel like I'm just kind of a lifer, you know. It's like it's just something it's never stopped being fun to play music with people and make up songs. I've cooled off in the last few years. I've had some others. I did a side project with two of the guys from Popsicko and with Joey Cape and with the guy from my earlier band with Steve from Nerf Herder and Chris from the Foo Fighters called Lost Kittens. So with Luke Tierney, who was the singer of that band. So we all got together and did this sort of like Santa Barbara all-star band called the Playing Favorites. We made a record.
You know what? Can I just tell you right now, when I asked people, I told people they're on the band, I had a friend ask when the greatest supergroup of all time was going to release a follow-up. To exactly the favorite. So we have people who are very much fans of the Playing Favorites.
That's awesome. I never hear anybody talk about the Playing Favorites, and I'm super.
Joey Cobra, musician Joey Cobra did. He fucking loves your band.
Oh, dude, thank you. Yay! Oh, it's like it's bittersweet because it's like we love it was such a fun project to do that record. We literally made that entire record in a week while Sugarcult was doing the drum tracks for our third record, Lights Out. I snuck away because I hate tracking drums. Like when they're in there tracking drums, it's like hell. Just listening to a snare, you know, a million times. Just
you don't like EQing snare tones and getting playing around for hours and hours.
So I was just like, hey guys, I was gonna go over there with the guy from the place and the thing. I'll just be right back, you know. So I would just like kind of like melt away. And I mean, I didn't need to be there for anything anyway. So I just like snuck away, and me and my friends got together at the studio and we were like, here's the project. Everyone's gonna bring a couple songs that they're not using in their other bands, and we're gonna just do like 3 songs a day. So I would like show you how the song goes, play it for you once, and you'd be like, cool. And then we'd jam it one time and record it. And then like maybe you'd say, hey dude, can we like do that part like 2 less times, or maybe add on this little cool idea this little riff. We'd be like, oh yeah, sure, let's go for it. And then we would literally record it for keeps. And then we'd be moving on. Then I'd be like, okay, what's your song? And you'd show me something, and we all like, and then maybe I would like switch to guitar or switch to bass, or someone else would, you know, so it was like just everyone just grabbing instruments. Like it wasn't like planned out. It was, you know what I mean? And super fun. So we did that whole record in like a week, the Playing Favorites. Hopefully we'll make another one someday, you know. But anyway, so I'd done, you know, some things like that, and, you know, done some other Bad Astronaut stuff through the years. But, you know, Sugarcult just slowly kind of faded away. After our third record, we just kind of went on hiatus because we were all doing different projects. Our bass player had started another project that actually became really big called Edward Sharp and the Magnetic Zeros.
Oh shit! I don't think I realized he was connected with that.
Yeah, no one realizes that. It's such a different world. But our bass player Aaron had like, you know, accumulated studio gear, and he had his roommate, which was this guy he had grown up playing music with. You know, they never really had a band, but they would just always like, you know, teach each other how to record, and they were just like bosom buddies, like just hung out, did everything together, learned music together. This guy Nico, and so they had this like kind of like musician house where it was just a bunch of like artsy weirdos hanging out and just like people smoking weed and recording, you know, doing projects together, you know, just classic like artist bachelor pad. While the rest of us were all like coupled up and like kind of more domesticated. Aaron was like living the artist life, you know. It was just like he'd get home from tour and he'd just be like, you know, holed up at some hotel for a while, hanging out with Kelly Osbourne, you know, and like going to all these lavish parties, hanging out with Paris Hilton. Like Aaron was just that guy. And so he knew all these people in town, and him and his buddy had all this gear, and they'd start just like, hey, you should come over to our house and record. And there's this guy named Alex who had been in a band we all like had a huge crush on called I'm a Robot that made this amazing record. If you ever check out, it's I Am a Robot. Check out that record. It's like a lost classic. Someone needs to do that. Record got me high on that one. So good. And the bass player of that was, I believe, Justin Meldal Johnson, who would go on to play with Beck. Guy with a big afro. You see him. He's like a big record producer. He's produced Paramore now. He's produced a bunch of stuff. But he was in that band. The drummer was this other guy, Joey Waronker, who was who also played with Beck. Basically, it was like a bunch of people from this sort of LA artsy Beck universe. And so the singer Alex wanted to do a different project. And so he started recording it with Aaron and Nico. And they started working on this thing. And they didn't have a name. It was just always like we'd be on tour and I'd be talking to Aaron and be like, yeah, we're working on this record, and Alex would come over and it's kind of just a vibe and we're just doing this thing. And we'd always kind of tease them about it because they were all just they were all a little bit irresponsible and just sort of artsy and just kind of dreamers, which is part of the reason, just very endearing quality. Aaron was certainly not the guy that would like get up early and like make phone calls. He was not hustling at all. He was like this guy sleeping in, and so we were all sort of like dismissive and like lovingly dismissive. We'd be like, dude, we called it Chinese democracy. We're like, how's Chinese democracy coming along, bro?
It'll come out eventually.
Yeah, exactly. Like the record you're always working on, but you're never going to actually put out. And then he just like, eventually they finished it and he played it for us. And we were like, dude, this is fucking great. This is like a Beatles record or something. This is a fucking vibe. Like, holy shit, you made this? He's like, yeah, I don't know what we're going to do with it. And then apparently like the actor Heath Ledger had been in their little friend group and hanging with them and was like, I don't know if he was like, had a couple drinks or whatever, but he was like, dude, I'm going to put this out, man. I'm going to start a label and put it out. And he was going to put it out, but then unfortunately he passed away, Heath Ledger from the actor.
Yeah.
And so then they were like, well, we've got this record, and he'd given them a little bit of momentum. Like, I think just knowing that he wanted to like get behind it and like put it out gave them the sort of like, hey, let's just actually do this. And they started playing some shows around town. Their shows were super fun. Singer's a great front man. And they had like 11 or 12 people because they just had this like revolving door of like people coming in and playing on the record. So when they started playing shows, it was like 12 people on stage, playing. And it was like this real, like almost kind of like hippie-ish, like I called it like hippie hipster. It was like hipsters, but like they're all like, growing out beards. And like, it was a weird little moment. And they started playing shows, and I'd go to the shows in LA just to support Aaron. And it was so good. And the guitar player, his buddy Nico was a great guitar player. This girl Jade who sang, and the guy Alex, and they started kind of like blowing up in the local scene in LA. And then before you knew it, they were starting to like, their record came out. That song Home became like a big smash with a whistling and all that.
Yeah, that thing's massive.
Aaron produced and co-wrote that song.
Wow.
And they started touring around, and they would like be like the festival band, like wherever they would play, it would be like, everyone's got to go see Edward Sharpe and the Magnetic Zeros. So we were like, at Sugarcult, we were kind of like slowing down. We're like, let's let Aaron do his thing. I was working on another project. Tim started to get into producing records for other artists. And this band we had met on tour, they were a local band in Utah called the Neon Trees.
Oh God, more.
Yeah. And he had kept in touch with them, and he had worked on a song with them. And that song ended up helping them get a record deal. The song Animal, he had co-written that song with their singer, Tyler. And then he basically like, the label, they got signed to a major label, and they were like, okay, we want to get a big name producer and blah, blah, blah. They were trying to get all these big guys, but the band was like, dude, we don't like any of these guys. We want to work with this guy from Sugarcult. We want to work with this guy, Tim. And they were like, Tim, what's he produced? And they're like, nothing. And the label was like, I don't know. We're making a big investment here. I don't want the guy from Sugarcult to produce your record. Who's he? And somehow they convinced him to let Tim take a crack at it. And Tim just crushed it. And he produced that first Neon Trees record, which had the song Animal. And became a big giant hit. So then Tim was like off to the races. And actually, weird thing, because I had just mentioned I'm a Robot. Justin Meldal Johnson had produced the second Neon Trees record, but the band, the label said, why don't we get Tim to produce one song just to sort of like, since, you know, because the band wanted to get more like, hey, let's try out Justin and make it a little more artsy. And then Tim co-wrote and produced one song for the second Neon Trees record that was produced by Justin. And that one song was Everybody Talks. So the one song Tim produced was the one song that was the big hit, right? So now Tim's got like 2 big hits. So now the phone's just ringing off the hook. And it's like, hey, do you want to do some Sugarcult stuff? He's like, I don't know, man. I'm producing a lot of records right now. And this other band from the Midwest comes to him from bumfuck nowhere, from Ohio or something. No.
Probably from Anderson.
Comes to him called Walk the Moon. And
Jesus
they have him produce their second record, which yields the song Shut Up and Dance. So suddenly our little singer Tim is like the most like in-demand producer in the game. And as far as like, okay, Neon Trees, Everybody Talks, Animal, Shut Up and Dance by Walk the Moon. And it was just like one thing after another getting hit up to the point where now he's produced like songs, the last couple songs by Blink-182, he co-wrote and produced. If you look on the latest on that Weezer record, he co-wrote and produced a couple songs on that one. So he's just become like this super successful producer. Right now he's working with the Regrets, that band, the Regrets. He's done all these things. So, you know, a lot of people are like, why isn't Sugarcult taking part in this whole, like, When We Were Young festival, kind of emo night, like sort of revival of the scene? And, you know, honestly, the truth is we're all just doing different things with our lives right now. It's not that we never really broke up. We never had this like, fuck you, dude, I'm sick of your shit. And, you know, we all love each other. I just hung out with Tim this weekend. We were like, you know, having ice cream together at a ski resort. You know what I mean? Like we hang out all the time. It's just that it just stopped feeling like the natural thing to do. I guess like, you know, we all found other ways to make a living. So it's not like we're like depending on Sugarcult to feed our families, you know? Yeah. So that when you're not desperate for money, you can actually do something for the right reason, which I think is the only reason you should be in a band or make a record, is doing it as a labor of love. And we kind of look at it like, why would we do a new Sugarcult record right now? Like, it doesn't seem like the thing we are here to do right now. Yeah. Will we do one someday? I hope so. I'll be the first one at the studio. I'll be like skidding in, you know, doing like I'll be like peeling out into the driveway of the studio. I'll be the first one there. You know, if Tim called me right now and said, do you want to go play a show? I'd be like right there. And I get calls all the time, people asking us to play shows, sometimes for really big money too. And I text him and I'll be like, dude, do you want to play? And he's like, oh, I can't right now, you know, blah. And I'm like, okay. And he's, and like, it would never, I would never want to do it unless he could do it. You know, if he didn't want to do it, I would never just do it because like, oh, we're getting paid a bunch of money. Let me just get like somebody else from another band to fill in and sing.
Get some hired guns.
Like that's right.
Oh yeah, no, not at all. Also, it's like, do you also, sometimes people don't think about this, like legacy wise, if it doesn't go great, do you want that era of the band? Like, you know what I mean? Like when you look back on Sugarcult, that reunion that was forced and the music that was kind of forced and it wasn't really there. And it's like, now that's part of the legacy too. You know what I mean? You have those great records, but then you also have this part that was forced and pushed out. People don't always think about that.
You know, I generally don't like to make fear-based decisions. Like I would never not make a record because I would be afraid of it not being as good as our previous records. But I also know that as a music fan myself, no matter how good a record, the Rolling Stones can make the best record of all time, and I'm still not going to fucking listen to it, even though they're probably one of my favorite bands of all time. Maybe I'll listen to it once, but it's never going to have a place in my heart the same way as like Exile on Main Street or something like that, right? So it's like, or you know, or Some Girls or whatever. And I know that's kind of like, I don't know. I guess it's kind of closed-minded. I mean, I love Superdrag too. I love those first 3 Superdrag records with like they're masterpieces. They can make a new record right now and I'd probably listen to it, but it's not going to occupy that same sacred space in my rock and roll heart. Just because, you know, I don't know. I think it's a moment in time and I, you know, I would love just for fun. I feel very confident in our legacy as far as like Start Static, Palm Trees and Power Lines, and Lights Out to me are like, you know, I feel like those records are very solid records that stand out. And I feel like if that was the only like, you know, message Sugarcult left behind for the, you know, future generations to discover on their own and listen to, then I can sign off on that. I'm like, that's good shit. That's good shit. Those are good records. I know they were well-intentioned. We were making those records with our heart in the right place. And they're honest, and they're who they, you know, they're who we were at the time. You know, if you listen to our first record, Start Static, it's very different than our second record, Palm Trees and Power Lines, which is also very different than our third record, Lights Out. So each record is an honest document of how we evolved as a band, but yet there's a common thread where you can tell it's Sugarcult. It's not like we like jumped on the emo train or jumped on the ska punk train or jumped on the screamo train or jumped on the metalcore train or jumped on the dance punk train. Like we just stayed who we were, but we evolved. A lot of respect for like the shirt you're wearing, the Replacements. To me, I always love the Replacements, where it's like, you know, every record sounds like an honest document of where they were as people and as a band. You know, the first record sounds like young people, you know, fucking shit up and going to punk shows. Then eventually you could tell like they started to become better at, you know, caring more about songwriting. And then it got to the point where a lot of people say, oh, Don't Tell a Soul. And, you know, those ones aren't as good and you're like, no, to me, they're great because they're honest. Paul Westerberg wanted to write more slower songs with an acoustic guitar. It would have been dishonest if it would have sounded like Sorry Ma Forgot to Take Out the Trash. You know,
he didn't want to do that at that point.
In his late 20s, trying to pretend he's still 19. You know, and you know, and it works both ways. Like I think of like, you know, I think Ryan Adams is a great songwriter, and I love one of my favorite records of all time is his record Heartbreaker, his solo record. But he was like, his earlier band Whiskey Town, I'd listened to those records and I didn't really believe them. They're still good records, like, you know, but the early Whiskey Town records, it felt like a guy who was too young to be singing songs like that. So it sort of felt like he was playing dress up a little bit and like reaching for something he hadn't stretched out enough to be able to reach. But by the time he made that solo record, you were like, holy shit, he's got enough, like he's been through enough wash and dry cycles in life that I can totally believe this guy. And then you go back and listen to maybe the last Whiskey Town record and you hear it with different ears. So like, I don't know if this, as you can see, I'm a total nerd, but I feel like text is really important. And when you make a record is going to be important. And I worry sometimes, like, you know, I don't really worry, but I do believe that a lot of people, they're like, yo, Sugarcult should make another record. When, you know, it's like, I feel like what they're saying without realizing it is they're basically saying, I wish I could be 16 again.
Yes. Yeah. 100%. You're right about that.
You know,
because a lot of people,
because we, you know, that's how we are. We're very emotional beings. And when you say, I want the band I liked from 2005 to make another record, what you're really saying is like, I want to go back to 2005. But the fact is, like, we've all moved on too. None of us are who we were in 2005. So if we made a Sugarcult record today, I don't think it would sound very similar to the records we made in the early 2000s, because that would be dishonest. It wouldn't be an honest representation, because none of us, we've all evolved as people and as artists. I think Tim's voice would sound similar. I think our tendencies, you know, I'm sure it would be a good record. You know, listen to all these songs Tim's co-written and produced, and you can hear the new. You want to hear the new Sugarcult record? Listen, I can make you a playlist of like all these songs Tim's. Let's see, "Talk Too Much" by Coin, "Everybody Talks" by Neon Trees, "Shut Up and Dance" by Walk the Moon. How about, let's see, the latest Regrets record. Let's see, what's that song? "End of the Game" on the new Weezer record. "Happy Days" on that Matt Skiba Blink-182 record. You know, you can put together the new Sugarcult record just by like compiling all the songs. Tim's
radio, literally turn on the radio, like the biggest songs of like the last decade.
Yeah, turn on the radio. You hear the new Sugarcult record. You know, we snuck in there. We made our record. You know, subconsciously, it's in there. It's dispersed on everybody. It's got, a little bit of Sugarcult in a little spoonful of sugar, Sugarcult in on everybody else's records. No, but no, it would be fun to make a record again, and hopefully we will. It'd be fun, but only if it's right. It would have to be. It would never just. I don't think it would be the right thing to do to just make a record because we feel like it's going to get us a bunch of money, or because we feel like it's, people are pestering us to do it. It has to be the right thing to do. I'm really curious. Cause like I said, I'm mostly a music fan, and I'm a huge fan of Sugarcult in addition to being part of it. And so I'm just curious. I'm as curious as everybody else. Like, I would love to see what it would sound like and what it would feel like for all of us to be in a room together again. And even if we just made the record and then never played it for anybody, even if we just did it for ourselves,
Well, I still want to hear, kind of going off all that, like when the Replacements are doing their reunion stuff. I mean, Paul and Tommy did go in, and rumor has it they recorded some. I don't know how far they got, but like they did play together. But Paul didn't feel, almost like you're talking about, is like what they did come up with. He didn't feel like was on par for like a follow-up Replacements record. Now, again, I don't know how far they got in. I don't know what that entails, but kind of the same thing. But on the flip side, which you're also talking about, I think when you genuinely do it, like one that I think about, X. I don't know if you're an X fan, but the album that they put out 2020, I mean, they put out a record in decades, and that's on par with the first 4 records. They put out an album. It's one of the best things they've ever put out, in my opinion. So like, I like what you were talking about. I like it where it's like Sugarcult could put out a record sometime, but the rush to do it, you know what I mean? Like a band who just rushes, like, we just got to get one out because like pop punk is big, so we just got to like put out another record. That's where I think bands can go wrong. If all you guys get in a room and you like write an album that truly feels like you and it feels right, it's like that. I think when good stuff can still come out. Like again, like with X wasn't trying to like put out, they went decades without music. Like they just toured, didn't put out records. But wouldn't you rather that amazing record than them to try to keep putting them out, just say every 2 years because they felt it was necessary? You know what I mean?
You really don't want to fall, if you can. I mean, I totally respect that some people just, most bands, it's just like it's the only way they can make a living. But man, you can always tell when someone makes a record, just because they're trying to, grab that, I don't know. It's just whatever. It's still going to be, it doesn't really matter, I guess, why someone makes a record as long as you make a record. But I think when they come from the intention does matter to some degree. Like where is it coming from? Is it coming from like, hey, we have something to say, or is it just like, oh, we got to figure something out here because we got to get back on the fucking, we got to get back on the hoodie traveling hoodie salesman circuit, We
got hoodies to sell.
And, I mean, I feel like our band was always a little bit misunderstood, and I don't mind it because I think we were misunderstood in a way that served us really well. We were able to sell a lot of records and have a lot of people at our shows, but I don't believe we ever once identified ourselves as a pop punk band or as an emo band, but we got kind of like thrown in with that whole movement when it was happening. And it worked out. It was cool because we got invited to a lot of those parties and got invited to a lot of tours. But I do feel like we were always a little bit of a sort of flag without a nation, like we didn't really fit the mold. Like if you go back now retrospectively and look at pictures of Sugarcult and then look at pictures of other bands that maybe were considered our contemporaries at the time, those bands look a lot more like each other than we do. We're the weirdos over here in the corner, like dressed like we're from, we were like trying to dress like the Clash or something like that. And then everyone else was like wearing like Hurley baggy shorts and doing like unison jumps, and had like side cocked ball caps on. Like we were not shopping at Hot Topic or like trying to be like Sum 41 or Blink 182. We were like trying to imitate, like, we were in the used section trying to find cool shit from we were trying to look like Blondie and the Cars and like the Clash and like, whatever, that kind of shit, but, at the same time, we were really enamored with that stuff, but we never wanted to like go down the road where you like become the like, de facto tribute band. We didn't want to like pretend it was still 1979, but we certainly borrowed heavily aesthetically from like the late 70s, early 80s, like power pop and original punk rock kind of new wave scene. You know, that was really something that we kind of connected on early on in the band. Like, you know, we used to cover Cars by Gary Newman when we would play bars in Santa Barbara. We would also play Talking in Your Sleep by the Romantics, you know, and like
pop punk bands really probably aren't really covering in their live set.
Yeah, you know, eventually once we got on the Warped Tour, we did like I Want to Be Sedated by the Ramones, and we did like No Action by Elvis Costello. We just always kind of like to sort of like dip into the used section of the record store, and we definitely were more into like kind of mining the corpse of the past for cool ideas and aesthetic cues rather than keeping up with the Joneses and trying to be like, oh, we got to dress like, you know, we got to buy the new Good Charlotte clothing brand or something. Like it just, that was, you know, that was just wasn't what we were about. And I'm not saying we were like better than or above anybody else, you know, that's just who we, just not what we were. And I do respect that we, you know, it's once you get invited to the cool kids table in high school, it's very you would be forgiven to start dressing like them and start sounding like them, right? You almost like have to, I don't know if it was a form of self-sabotage or what, but for us, it was like, man, we still want to stay who we are. And if they want to invite us to the party, we'll come to the party for sure. Yeah. Like, let me where's the beer? Where's the girls? Where's the chips and salsa? Like, I'm there, but we don't want to be invited to the party conditionally. Like, okay, well, here's the thing. If you want to be at this party, you gotta look like this. You gotta act like this. You gotta sound like this. Like and so that's what I think is kind of a cool thing about the scene that we got sort of, you know, kind of jumped into through the Warped Tour. You know, we did the Warped Tour like 3 times, and like magazines like Alternative Press and like you said, like Fuse, like there was a sort of movement that was happening in the early mid to mid 2000s, you know, with like pop punk and emo, and they were certainly like embraced us. And a lot of people just kind of go, I mean, I constantly go do like DJ gigs at those emo night parties, and you know, we're cool with it, but it's just nothing we ever self-identified as. You know, we none of. I mean, if you look through my record collection, Tim's record collection, Aaron's record collection, and I don't even know if our drummer has a record collection, but like if you look through any of our shit, you're not going to find one record by any of those bands. Not because we don't like them. I mean, maybe, I don't know. Let's see. I mean, we're going to have Green Day records.
Throw a Green Day in there.
We're going to have Green Day records. I mean, Green Day is a huge influence on Sugarcult for sure. And Foo Fighters, and maybe you'd find Bleed American by Jimmy Eat World and some of those earlier Mark Trombino Jimmy Eat World records.
Gotta have those in there.
Those are great records. I mean, you know, we super like we held Jimmy Eat World's Bleed American up with high regard, but you know, that's about it. Totally, you know, that's about it.
It's kind of funny you mentioned that, man, because like just as being a fan throughout the years. And I really think like truly it's just from like following you on Instagram, but realizing like kind of that, not that like I had assumptions of like what your music tastes were per se, but going, oh fuck, like this guy really likes the Replacements or like Superdrag or like this or that, like really getting a better idea of what someone's taste in music is. Actually, someone who comes up to mind, I know we've talked about, but like Chris Rowe comes to mind, where you think Ataris and pop punk, but like at the height of that band, if you look at like press photos, he's wearing a My Bloody Valentine t-shirt, or like I was talking about, like, you know, they're having the guy who produced like, you know, Husker Du work with him because he fucking loves Husker Du. The whole reason I got into Billy Bragg was because they covered a New England. Like literally through the Ataris, I got into Billy Bragg and Sebadoh. Like these weird bands who have nothing. You wouldn't think of Billy Bragg and Sebadoh with like the Ataris per se, but fuck, Chris Rowe likes the good shit. And you kind of like with Sugarcult, like you're bringing people.
And I'll tell you what, dude, when we would tour, you know, we would tour with a lot of these bands and I would bond with them. And I'll tell you, like, the members of the bands, like I think about Paul from Good Charlotte, the bass player of Good Charlotte. We toured with them a million times. And I never really got, I mean, I know Joel, the singer, was like super into hip hop. Like all he ever listened to was like hip hop. Right. Mm-hmm. So, but Paul, the bass player, he was like into the most like avant-garde, trippy, like Boards of Canada and Thievery Corporation, like really cool, like electronic music and like experimental, like, you know, Warp Records kind of shit, and just super cool shit that you would never equate with Good Charlotte, right? Like I said, Joel was super into hip hop. Then I think about like we toured with Motion City Soundtrack. Those guys were like our buddies. We toured with them a bunch of times. First time we ever headlined in Europe, they opened for us. And that was 20 years ago, by the way.
Wow.
They're just celebrating the 20-year anniversary of that first record with like Future Freaks Me Out. Getting to know those guys, you know, they got lumped in. It was always like, you know, Get Up Kids. And, you know, they were sort of seen as like the new Get Up Kids or something. Dude, you get in there with their record collection. Those guys are into like Archers of Loaf and Jawbox and like, you know, just the coolest fucking underground indie music from the 90s, you know. Nothing about them was like what people eventually lumped them in with. So, and then same thing with like Mark we toured with Blink-182. I'd sit with Mark and we'd geek out, and like, you know, share iPods with each other and like basically steal each other's music, you know? And because that's just what you did, you know, when there was iTunes, it was like, dude, let me plug into your laptop and drag a bunch of your stuff onto my iPod. And
I remember that. I remember like, doing that.
Next to this like multi-millionaire, and he's like, dude, can I grab that from you? So it just goes to show we're not stealing music because we can't afford it. We're stealing music because we love music and we just can't get enough of it. But that is a wonderful quality I see in lots of people in all these bands. I don't mean to be name dropping, but there's people that just are in love with music, in love with it, you know? And I love to see that when someone's like, so Mark Hopp is just into such, like he's the one who turned me on to Block Party. He was all about this band Block Party. He loves The Cure, obviously. Yeah. Nothing about, I mean, he also loved like, you know, he loves the Replacements. He loves so much stuff. Like he's not sitting there going, dude, you want to hear Newfound Glory? Like he's not telling me about like, you know, he's like into, and it's not to say Newfound Glory is not awesome. And by the way, speaking of Newfound Glory, look at their singer Jordan. Half the time he's wearing like a Pixies t-shirt, or something like that. You know,
Wipers shirt. He wears the Wipers a lot, like a, you know,
totally. He's got great fucking taste in music. And then their guitar player Chad, who's like super immersed
hardcore, dude.
Hardcore. You know, he was in like Shai Hulud, and he comes from like, he's like all about like, you know, the East Coast, like bands like Avail and all that kind of stuff. You know, it's just, I don't know where I'm going with this, but like, it's the same thing. Like if you talk to Cohen from Sum 41, he's just like all about like cool, like, you know, 70s British punk rock and like New York City punk rock. Like, you know, people who are in bands are usually people that are music fanatics, and they're not necessarily, it's not to say they don't like the music they play, but it's short-sighted to assume that just because somebody plays you know, a certain style of music, that's what they're going to go home and listen to, you know?
Yeah. Do you get that though?
Dope man, you must comply. Don't get high off your own supply. NWA. Right. So, yeah, same thing. Joey Cape. I remember when I was a kid hanging out with Joey Cape, I tripped out because he was like, before Lagwagon, he played in like a crazy, like thrash metal band that sounded like Anthrax or something. And,
shit.
And then when he got in Lagwagon, you know, Lagwagon was very like, you know, kind of metal punk, like really, and you go, you hang out with Joey Cape, you flip through his like playlist. He's like Jim Croce, Carole King, Neil Diamond, Elton John. I mean, he's just all about like singer-songwriters from the 70s. That's what he's all about. Like Seals and Crofts, like all that shit. Not one thing. He's not listening to Pennywise and Bad Religion. I mean, of course he loves those bands, but like, that's not where he comes from. He's coming from like, you know, it's and the funny thing is I read an interview with James Hetfield from Metallica, and he was like, they're like, what do you listen to? He's like, I listen to Tom Waits. I listen to Jackson Browne. I listen to James Taylor. You know, I listen to Queen. And it's like, not one thing that he say. He's not like, oh, I listen to Slayer and I listen to Testament and I listen, you know. So it's just, you know, when I was a kid and I'd read about the bands I liked, And I had this really sort of small, narrow-minded worldview of like, okay, these are the bands I like. But then I'd read their interviews and they would open my mind and like show me other cool shit, you know, and that's what leads you to like discovering all this other cool shit. And so I feel like as we were touring, it's almost like your responsibility. Like when you see Chris wearing his, you know, My Bloody Valentine shirt, it's like you get this moment where people are staring at you or they're listening to you. You get this opportunity to like break through that for another kid out there who thinks that, oh, I'd like to try out different music, but I'm not allowed to because I identify as an emo kid. And it's like, no, man, check it all out. It's all cool. You know, it's like, and there's so much cool shit to discover out there. And I think it belongs to, it's like incumbent on the artists of whatever generation that's out there doing it to sort of like curate the museum of rock and roll and be like, hey, by the way, check out this cool shit too. You know,
well, you gotta know your roots. I mean, because like what you're going off of, I could talk about this for a million years. Because like, I mean, I'm not on the band side, but like I was gonna ask you if you get that misconception of like people just for some reason like assume you listen to whatever your music is, and it's like the thing I've learned probably from interviewing bands, and I mean just in general throughout life is like, yeah, they're not sitting around listening. If you're in a skate punk band, more than likely, you're not sitting around the other 23 hours of the day listening to skate punk. Like, you probably listen to different things. And like, you know, it's good to listen to different kinds of music. You can like all those bands you mentioned. I love Newfound Glory. I love Sum 41. I love Sugarcult. I love like all these different, like all these different bands. But I also love like the bands you're talking about. Like I love Superdrag. I love the Replacements. I love, like you can like more than one thing is I think what I'm getting at. Some people don't seem to realize that. You can like more, and most of your favorite musicians probably do like more than one thing.
Oh, 100%.
It's where their sound is morphed. Like if they liked one thing, they'd sound like that one thing.
Dude, this is so random, but I somehow ended up at a birthday party. This guy we know who used to be in the Warped Tour world, he now plays guitar in LA Guns, the like 80s kind of, hard rock band. And I was at this birthday party for him at the Rainbow, which is like the total like heavy metal hangout on the Sunset Strip. And in walks, of course, like because he's in LA Guns. So Tracy Guns, the main guy from LA Guns, who was actually the reason Guns N' Roses are called Guns N' Roses, because originally before Slash, he was the guitar player. So it was Tracy Guns with Axl Rose. So they called it Guns N' Roses. It's kind of a little fun fact. Anyway, he's in there, and all these other like long hair metal dudes are in there. They're all playing in different, like one guy was playing in like the touring version of Cinderella, and the other guys, like I was meeting all these people from the metal world. All we talked about the whole night was Jellyfish. Have you ever heard the band Jellyfish?
Metal band, Jellyfish,
yeah, brilliant band. But they're like this super power pop, like kind of like bubblegum, like really amazing. Actually, the guitar player of Jellyfish, Jason, from their first record, now plays guitar for St. Vincent.
Oh, really?
And the keyboard player, like co-songwriter of Jellyfish, Roger Manning, has been playing keyboards for Beck for like years. And then, so small world. So I could get into it. Jellyfish is another one of those bands. Like there's this anomaly, this band that happened in the early 90s, didn't really attain commercial success, but has become like mythological. Like anytime you talk to this group full of like these metal, like shredding metal players, all they're talking about is Jellyfish.
They are one of those bands.
Show, anyways, I could go on and on, but dude, speaking of the Replacements, you just reminded me, the singer, Jimmy, the singer of Pennywise.
Yeah.
He is like favorite band of all time, Replacements.
Oh, fuck yeah.
Okay. So more nerdy history since I brought up Pennywise. The guy who was the singer of Pennywise before Jim, when they were just like a local band in Hermosa Beach, Manhattan Beach area.
Yeah.
In the South Bay. There's a guy named Keith Brown. Oh,
that's Popsicko. Your singer.
Moved to Santa Barbara after Pennywise kicked him out because he started writing too many songs about girls. he was more of a power pop guy. And I mean, they love him. They're all friends, but like he was like a freshman and they were seniors, he was like super young. And so he moved down to Santa Barbara with his new band he had with his buddies called the Wonderfuls. And the Wonderfuls play a show with my band in high school called Lost Kittens. And we all sort of got to know each other a little bit. And then years later, I'm like living in LA with Chris Shiflett and all them, trying to get the Lost Kittens happening after I graduated high school. And then I come back to Santa Barbara because that band falls apart. I come back to Santa Barbara and I connect with Keith Brown and the old drummer of Lost Kittens, Steve Sherlock, who's now the drummer of Nerf Herder. And we start a band. We start a band, and eventually I get this guitar player guy named Tim to play with us, not Tim Pagnotta from Sugarcult, but this guy named Tim Cullen. And we started this band that eventually Steve had to leave because he just didn't want to do it as full on as we did. And we got this other guy, Mick Flowers, to play. And that's what became Popsicko.
That's amazing.
Everything is like connected and grafted onto itself. It's such a trip. Keith was he was not from Santa Barbara. He moved to Santa Barbara. He grew up in the South Bay and was the original singer of Pennywise.
That's insane.
Yeah.
It is fucking insane.
Yeah. And you listen to Popsicko, we sound nothing like Pennywise, but you realize Popsicko sounds a lot like the Replacements. And Keith's growing up in Manhattan Beach around the same, and Jim Lindbergh's there. They're all listening to the Replacements. Like my buddy who was from that same group of friends, because those guys are all a bit older, you know, like I was the baby in Popsicko. I was like the teenager playing in a band with a bunch of guys in their 20s, you know, but like those guys are like, everybody in Manhattan. If you come to California, where are you in the world? Where are you?
I'm like 90 minutes from Buffalo, New York. I'm in Western New York.
So if you're in California, like if you're in LA, if you go to the ocean, there's Long Beach is over here. Then you've got like San Pedro, which is where like the Minutemen were from.
Yes.
And then you've got this kind of ritzy area called Palos Verdes. And then right on the other side of that, you've got Redondo Beach, Hermosa Beach, and Manhattan Beach. So it's like these three beach cities that are all adjacent to each other. So they call it the South Bay. And so from that little area right there, you get Black Flag, Red Cross, Circle Jerks, Descendants, and then years later, Pennywise, right? So, and then sort of in that area, you also get the Beach Boys, by the way. Okay, you go a little bit further and you've got, giving you guys a geography lesson, you've got Venice Beach and Santa Monica, okay? And then eventually you get to Malibu over there, okay? So in Venice, you got Suicidal Tendencies and Excel, you know? I can't remember who's from Santa Monica. Shit, I'm totally blanking. But yeah, so many bands that come from like this. And then if you go all the way up the coast, eventually you get to Santa Barbara, you know, which is like 90 miles away. That's where we all came from. And that's where you get RKL, Lagwagon, the Ataris, Mad Caddies, Nerf Herder, Sugarcult, you know, on and on and on.
It is funny. I've visited Santa Barbara once, and my two first stops was the Blue Skies trailer park, the sign, the big old sign, and then I went down to Haley Street and I had to take a picture of I had to say I was down on Haley. Yeah. Those were literally the two things I did when I got there. Those were the first two things I did. Yep,
that's amazing. I love that. And that Nerf Herder song, Down on Haley, was actually, there's two songs on that first Nerf Herder record that were from Perry's previous band, Perry Grip, who of course now has become his own thing with like all those cool little songs he writes. Before Nerf Herder, he had an amazing band that used to play with Popsicko all the time. And they were called Decline of Paisley John Shaver. And Perry was like, he used to call himself Andrew Broomhead, and he used to write the like column in the local free like entertainment paper. He wrote the like column about the local music scene.
Oh, nice.
It was called Positively State Street. And so he had two songs in that band that were like the best songs that band had. One was called Sorry, and one was called Down on Haley. And then when he started Nerf Herder with Steve, they carried some of those songs over, and those are the two songs of the whole Decline of Paisley John Shaver catalog that stuck. And kind of a fun little fact. I mean, I'm getting in the weeds here, Anthony.
I'm telling you, you don't get it. Like this stuff, I love this stuff. Like everything we've talked about, I love this stuff. I mean, I literally went to Santa Barbara and went to a trailer park to take a selfie in front of a neon stuff. Like, I love this shit. I absolutely love it.
You'll appreciate this. So when I was in the Ataris with Chris and Derek, it was just the three-piece. Me and Derek started jamming because we were waiting for Chris, I think, at the rehearsal space. And I was trying to rip off the band Superchunk because we were all really into Superchunk at the time. And I was trying to write a song. I was like, what would Superchunk do? Like just sort of trying to like write a song inspired by Superchunk. And I started doing this riff, and it was like, and Derek started just playing like, and so we just started playing this thing, and then Chris walks in and he's like, dude, what the fuck is that? I love that. And me and Derek had worked it out, and it's basically just the instrumental to what became the song 11596.
Oh shit.
Yeah.
That's
so if
amazing.
you look on that record, Blue Skies, that you're talking about, that's the one song that I wrote for the Ataris.
And super chunk influenced.
And it was just me and Derek sitting in there trying to like, because I was like, Derek, I have this idea. It's kind of a super chunk vibe. And we just started playing it. Yeah.
That is amazing. That is absolutely.
And
That
then
also.
Chris basically added the melody and the lyrics, and that became 11596.
That's
And
wild.
I believe 11596, Chris was like a teen father. Like he had a kid when he was like 16. I think that was the song. I think that was the birthday of his kid that he had.
I've always wondered what that date was.
It's like, Angie, I'm sorry. You know, like basically like I was too young to be a dad. And so he basically had to like bail on his like girlfriend and their kid to go to Santa Barbara and make it as the Ataris, but he was too young to be a dad. But it's like, it's a really touching song if you listen to it. So I was very like, honored that it was kind of like my little souvenir, because I had left the Ataris by the time that record came out and was made. And actually Joey Cape produced that record.
I don't think I realized he produced that, actually.
Joey produced that record, and he produced the first Nerf Herder record. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So it was a lot of, like I said, it's a lot of intertwined stuff. And actually the reason Bad Astronaut became a band was because I had already played in in the Ataris with Derek, and Joey had played with him with Lagwagon. And I had actually played with Derek it's a whole other story, but I played with him in a band when we were children called Illiterate, that eventually morphed into a band called Section 8 that eventually got taken over by Joey after I left and became Lagwagon. So there's that. So much fucking history.
It's insane.
So once me and Derek were hanging out, I think we were both home. I can't remember who Derek was playing with at the time. And I think he might've been playing with RKL, and I was home from like doing some, I was kicking around getting Sugarcult started. And me and Derek and Joey like somehow just met up and started drinking. And we were like, dude, kind of like felt bad that we weren't like, we're like, I miss when, all our bands were so serious. Like Sugarcult was getting really serious. Lagwagon was super serious and professional. And I can't remember what Derek was doing, but we were just sort of lamenting, like, do you remember the good old days when we would just like get together and just make up songs and like, hang out and just kind of like do it for just, without any expectations. And we were kind of just, having some drinks and talking about that. And then we had this idea. We're like, dude, we should just start doing that. And, let's get together and just play. Like, and Joey was like, I have a bunch of songs that don't really fit Lagwagon. We should just get together and see what happens. So me, Derek, and Joey started playing together, and that's what became Bad Astronaut.
Nice.
So another the three of us, and I had a song called Single that I had written, and then Joey had he liked it and kind of reconfigured it. That became a song. We just kind of worked on these songs, and then we brought in, we went to this recording studio where we all would record called Orange Whip in our hometown. And one of the engineers there was my buddy, Tom Flowers, who had played in the Lap Dancers with me. And he's a great guitar player and great songwriter. And then the guy who owns the studio was this cello player named Angus Cook, who had actually been in a band with Tom called the Wood Burning Project that was amazing in Santa Barbara. And so like those guys knew each other, and we sort of like had like Tom play some guitar on the record because he's, otherwise Joey's a pretty good guitar player, but Tom's like a really good guitar player. So Tom would play some parts on it. Angus, we eventually got Angus in there to play some cello on the record. Right. And then we had this other guy named Todd Capps, who just a friend from our local music scene who Joey had grown up with. And we wanted some keyboards. So we called Todd to play some keyboards on the record. And then eventually, we basically made this mandate where we were going to try not to do photo shoots. We were not going to like make T-shirts. We were definitely not going to play shows. Bad Astronaut didn't play a show ever until we made our first record in like 2000 or 2001. And I think we played our first show ever in like 2010 or 2011.
It took a while. It was a
We-
long time.
the whole thing when we started the band was like, we're not going to play shows. We're not going to tour. We're not going to do photo shoots. We're not going to do interviews. We're just going to make records. And like, they're going to be these like art project records, like anything goes. Like we can just like experiment and just, use the studio as an instrument, kind of like inspired by like Pet Sounds and Sgt. Pepper's, like that sort of mentality of like, let's go in without ever having to worry about trying to play these songs live. Let's just make these, like, who cares who plays on what part? Like, let's just, we did all these really unorthodox kind of recording methods. It was super fun records to make. I remember Joey had an idea. He went to Radio Shack and bought like every single little like shitty microphone they had, like the little like toy microphones and like little dictating, machines that like lawyers would have to like, those little mini cassette players. He bought a bunch of those and put them on a table in front of the drums and then like mic'd the drums with those. So they would distort. And so if you listen to some of the drums, like we had like the traditional mics on the drums, but then we also had those. So he would mix that in. I tracked all my bass parts through a guitar amp, so like we did all kinds of cool shit, in the studio. And we never, it wasn't like, we didn't worry about like, first it was just me, Derek and Joey but then we were like, well, since this isn't a real band, we might as well just make everybody in the band. So we were like, okay, Angus is in the band. Tom's in the band. If you play on this record, you're in the band. At one point we had this other guy named Jonathan come in on the second record and did some programming stuff. So he was in the band for, if you look at like pictures of Bad Astronaut that are out there, it's like, it's as bad as Ed Sharp. There's like all these people just hanging out. It's just kind of this musical collective without any conceit that we were ever going to like play shows or be a traditional band. Eventually we did start playing some shows long after Derek passed away, but, and it was really fun to play those shows. And hopefully I always hope that maybe we'll do more, but it's hard. Bad Astronaut's like 6 people. So it's hard to get like 6 grownups to clear their schedules and be able to do something,
It's a hard thing about the band. I mean, it's like, I think everybody wants to be in one, but I mean, we talked about earlier, I mean, keeping it going, the longevity and being able to make it work and stuff, like, there's wanting to get in and have the band, but the actual work and the stuff that goes into it, that's hard to keep it going. Sometimes
it's a lot, and I do like, I love, there's something to be said about having like a long-term band, that's just like, keeps on going, like the Foo Fighters or something that's through the years, Iron Maiden or whatever you got, there's something about that I do kind of lament. Like, I wish that we had that. Like, I really wish Sugarcult would still be just a regular band that would like make records, tour, even if we took long breaks. But, I'm only one guy in a 4-person band. So you can't force that kind of shit. If if everybody's not on that page, it's not going to work. Otherwise it's just, but I think that whether you're a band like the Foo Fighters that continues on for indefinitely, or if you're something like the Playing Favorites, that's basically a project, at the end of the day, it's all a project. Because every time when you're in a band, your record is your project and you're doing it. You're making up the songs. You're fine tuning the songs. You're going in and capturing the songs. You're documenting it. Then you're packaging it. Then you're going out and you're touring and you're playing those songs. And then inadvertently you make up more songs. And then you make another. So it's like each record you make as a kid, whether it's like a kid you've had. And sometimes you have a kid with the same person. Sometimes you have a kid with a bunch of different people, but each one of them still gets to have its own life. And so I look at, like, I don't see it like the records I made with Sugarcult, the records I made with Bad Astronaut, the record I made with the Playing Favorites, the record I made with Popsicko, that, I don't see those as like separate things. They're all things that I'm a part of, that I see at the same. And it doesn't matter. Like, I don't love Palm Trees and Power Lines more than I love the Playing Favorites, just because the Palm Trees and Power Lines made a lot more money and had bigger hits on the radio. And like, same thing with like Popsicko. No one's heard Popsicko, but to me, that's probably, if I had to pick one record, that's the record I'm most proud of all the records I ever made in my life. It's probably that one, because that was the first record I ever made, and it was the first band that I really like started to get traction with, and has, it's like a really important moment in my life. And I listened to the record, I'm like, this is a fucking great record. So
it really is.
It's not like it's a cringe thing where you go back and listen. You're like, oh God, what were we thinking? We were so young and naive. Like, I go back and listen and I go, fuck, I can't believe I was on that record. That's like a record I would buy,
Oh,
So,
absolutely. I mean, if you want to talk, like, I mean, I want to talk a bit about that here. Like, I mean, off to a bad start. Cause like I was telling you, I'm just discovering you guys. And I mean, from the second I heard a song just a few weeks ago, I probably heard Popsicko a week before I hit you up. That was my introduction, and like fucking hit me in the face right away. I'm like, oh my God, how did I never know you're in this band? How did I not know about you guys? Right up my alley. I'm like, how, like,
oh, cool.
you almost feel disappointed that you're just learning. You're happy
well,
learning about it.
That's the reason why we decided to do this this reissue of the record, because we made this record, and at the time, things were really happening in the 90s, and then after our singer Keith died, we just kind of like all went and did different things. Like I've already told you that whole story. Our drummer went off and eventually played in the Rentals with the bass player of Weezer, Matt Sharp, and our other singer, co-singer, guitar player Tim Cullen eventually made an amazing record with a band he had called Summer Camp that was on Madonna's label Maverick. They made this great record. You should look it up. But everyone just sort of went on with their lives and did things. And eventually, like, it was just one of those things where when you're young, you just don't have the time to look back. You're constantly just like, you're just 10 and 2 going like 90 miles an hour, trying to like, tear off the rear view mirror. Don't look back. It's just, it really. And so all of a sudden time goes by, and I'm just like, I feel like, I think it's probably, such a cliche, but probably during the lockdown era of the pandemic, where you just have time to like get a little bit more reflective. And like, that's where we put out that Bad Astronaut box set with the vinyl reissue. And that, Sugarcult had the 20-year anniversary of Start Static that we did a vinyl thing for, and so just that was sort of in the air. And my, my buddy Steve, who lives close to me, who was Keith Brown's best friend. He was like the drummer of the band The Wonderfuls that Keith originally played in before Popsicko. He's like, we just every once in a while text each other. And, he hit me up about, hey man, he's a writer now. He's a fiction writer.
Oh, nice.
And he's like, I want to do like an oral history of Popsicko. Would you be willing to give me some quotes? He's like, I just feel like, there's a lot of young people or in bands that are sort of taking their cues from the 90s right now. And I feel like this is a story that needs to be told, especially since some of the guys in Popsicko went on to do other bands like Sugarcult or whatever. It's like, and I was like, dude, of course I'll give you, send me your questions and I'll do the interview. And then I connected him to Mick and Tim, the other two guys from the band, and they did some interviews. And then eventually, of course, we started to we got Chris Shiflett to give some testimony. We got Joey Cape to give some testimony. Other people that were involved. We found old, I saved everything. So I had like old magazine clippings from us and pulled out like quotes from Keith from what, from times he had gotten interviewed. We got Fletcher from Pennywise to give us some quotes, and we started growing into this thing. I was like, what? It's a shame to just have this be something that lives on your blog. I was like, we should get this thing. So I got to be published in this, in the Santa Barbara Independent in our hometown paper. And then we were like, we should develop this into a book. And then I'm like, what we should do is reissue the music, because no one can listen to the music. And so that he had been connected to this label called Big Stir Records, and they were like specialized in like finding like cool, obscure, underground stuff. And so they were like, let's put out let's do like a vinyl pressing of this record, because it had come out on CD and then gone out of print, a million years ago, and never, no one ever really had the it's kind of just like, oh, I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to, do you want to deal with it? No, I don't want to deal with it. So we never really put it out on Spotify and all that kind of stuff. So it was just like, people have to dig for it. It's out there somewhere. And we're like, let's just put this out in a way that's going to be proper. But then, of course, because we're crazy, we're like, we can't do anything halfway. So let's go all the way. And I found all these old flyers we had, and I wrote these liner notes, and we did this whole thing. And we revised the cover art. We reconfigured the songs. We changed all the, we just kind of gave it a fresh coat of paint. And then we made the oral history. We expanded it. I found a bunch of just memorabilia. I have the original piece of paper that Keith wrote his phone number down on, and then had charted out the lyrics to some song, and just all this cool shit, set lists, old flyers and photographs, and just cool shit that's just been sitting in a box at my mom's house for 100 years, and just kind of put a bunch of that stuff together. And we made an actual book that is like the history of Popsicko. And so you buy the vinyl, and it comes with a book.
Oh, nice.
And it's limited edition. There's only 250 copies of it. So hopefully there's not sold out yet, but that's out there right now. You can get it through Big Stir Records. I think it's bigstirrecords.com. And then they've been like sort of gradually releasing like two songs at a time and making those available for streaming. And I imagine at some point, probably when the record sells out, we'll put the whole record on like Spotify. So, and then the book will maybe come out as like an ebook or something like that. But I mean, I don't know. I'm just the type of person that likes to have a collector's item, So
I gotta tell you, I mean, I haven't ordered one yet, but seeing the zine and like the whole setup of it, I love it because it's this really nice and neatly packaged, like, hey, if you're not familiar with this band, it's all right here. You've kind of you kind of put everything for us, where it's like, you may not be familiar with us, but you're going to get a fucking history lesson. Like, this is a nice crash course into Popsicko. Like, you don't have to go digging for this weird thing or this or that, including a band from pre-social media. So a lot of this stuff's probably, you can't find those magazine clippings, but like with this, you can fucking jump on this. And now all of a sudden you have years worth of stuff, which would have taken forever to dig up if I could even dig it up. And now it's all in this one nice place.
That's the idea. I mean, that's the idea, is like, we wanted this, we're just like, look, man, we need to make this available to the world. People can decide if they like it or not, but we did it. It's a document. We existed and we were a thing. And so let's put this out there. And that was just sort of our attitude. It was like the idea of putting out the story, but then we were like, well, we need the music to be available if we're going to tell the story. And then we were like, but if we're going to put out the music, we got to tell the story, so it just sort of became this like complementary situation where it was like, I mean, I'm not saying the record doesn't stand up on its own. You can just put on the record and listen to it. But like we were saying earlier, it's like when you know the context and the story, you can put it in and you can, place it in its place in history. You just appreciate it more.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, for instance, this thing I have hanging up on my wall here, it's just like, you look at it, it's like, oh, that's cool art. Like, someone come over to my house for dinner and see that and go, oh, I like that. And then they go, what is that? And then I go, well, it's, they go, is that John Lennon? And you go, yeah. Okay, well, that's cool if there's a little circle around it. And you go, yeah. Well, that's the Germs logo. Why does John Lennon have the Germs logo on his face? Because that was the cover of the LA Weekly, which is the newspaper in LA, on the week that John Lennon was murdered. Because Darby Crash, the singer of the Germs, overdosed on heroin the same, like the day before or the day after John Lennon was murdered, which is so basically they were like, here's an issue where we're like two iconic frontmen, one from the biggest band in the world and one from probably the most like notorious punk band from California.
Yeah.
Both are dead. And we're covering both of those stories. So they made this like the cover of the LA Weekly. So this guy was, an artist, put together like limited edition prints of it. And I'm like, dude, I got to have that. Cause to me, that's pop punk. You got the Germs, punk, the Beatles, pop, John Lennon, who's probably the most punk rock of the Beatles, as far as just like, he's the most incendiary, outspoken motherfucker. Right. And it's like, to me, it's just like, that says so much, but in and of itself, you could just walk in and go, oh, I like that. I like the composition of that design. Like some little kid who doesn't know who the Beatles or the Germs are could just walk in and be like, oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So to me, that's the beauty of art, is it's like, it should be appreciated on the surface level, just in and of itself, without knowing that it was from the 90s or from yesterday or from tomorrow. But then it can be more deeply appreciated once you know the story. And usually once you know the story, even the part of it that didn't resonate with you before now suddenly resonates with you.
Yeah. I love it. And actually, I love that too, that I've been staring at that this whole interview, not knowing, I didn't even see I didn't see the circle. I didn't even see the Germs logo, nor would I put that together, but holy fuck, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That is so goddamn cool. That is neat. Oh my God. That is so yeah, you definitely had to order one of those. That was definitely
I had to, and I'm such a nerd. Like, if you've ever heard of this guy named Brian Ray Turcotte, he wrote like the book called Fucked Up and Photocopied. And he has like these amazing like coffee table books about like punk rock culture. So this book, his first one was Fucked Up and Photocopied. Then he did one that was like Punk is Dead Punk Is, I can't remember what it was called. And then he also recently did one where he collected a bunch of like original punk rock t-shirts and then like took photographs of them. So it's like a coffee table book of OG. So he did this thing and it was like a benefit. Like the money that they raised from selling these was put to something, and it didn't actually come signed, but I asked him if he would sign it because they were in limited edition. There's like 50, I think 50, maybe 52 of them made. And he asked me, what number do you want? And I was like, number 13. So he signed it for me and numbered it 13 out of 50 or whatever it is.
That's fucking amazing, dude.
Right?
That is so cool.
I mean, you know, it's just, I'm such a nerd, and it's not like I'm doing that so I'll be able to like sell it for a bunch of money one day. Like that's the last thing on my mind. It's just that, you know, like we're saying, I'm just fucking, I'm just an overgrown fucking teenager. I'm still in love with the whole romance of it all, you know?
I have a cowboy hat signed by Tommy Stinson that is worth $0 to anybody else. But I'm like, I fucking remember asking Tommy Stinson to sign this stupid hat he was wearing. And
That's
I'm
amazing.
like, I fucking love
amazing.
it. Like I look at, yeah, but like, it's that thing where like, yeah, it means, I mean, I love too, talking to like someone like you who's on the musician side, but is just as much of a music fan. I appreciate that side of it.
Well, I mean, this sounds so corny because I've said this before in interviews, but like I've always said, like the reason I started playing music is because like I was such a fan that the front row wasn't close enough. I needed to climb inside it. I needed to get on stage and like, you know, experience it from that perspective too. But you know, I'm still just as, you know, just you'll catch me in the crowd just as much as you'll catch me on stage. You know, a lot of people I know that are in bands, they're like, yeah, I love music, man. I love, you know, but they still don't like, they love playing music. They love recording music, but they're not like wild about like, you know, listening to other people's music or collecting records or anything like that. And for me, it's like, no way, man. It's like, to me, it's all one it's all connected. It's just playing music and making up songs, making records is just an extension of, you know, marveling at music too. And to me, it's not just about the music. Like I love the culture. I love the history. I like the way the artwork and like the story. You know, there's certain artists I like reading about more than I like listening to. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Like just the mythology of it all and the culture of it all is just so exciting, you know?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You heard about the punk rock, the punk rock museum that's about to open up?
Yeah.
In Vegas?
Yeah, I have heard about that. That looks really sick.
They came over to my place and took a bunch of my stuff. So I gave them a bunch of like, you know, old flyers and stuff like that, but also a bunch of like the early Sugarcult stuff, like the guitar that I have in the Bouncing Off the Walls video, and nice. I think the outfit I was wearing, and a bunch of like early Sugarcult memorabilia. So they're gonna have that in there, which is really, really cool.
That's really fucking cool.
I'm probably not supposed to talk about this, but I might as well, because if someone's been listening for this long, then they're clearly fucking crazy. And I want to be your friend. If you've been listening this long, DM me on Instagram right now, because we got to be friends, because you have passed the test. You're officially enough of a nerd that we can be friends. But starting in, I believe in June or July, I'm going to be giving, they're having like at the Punk Rock Museum, they're having different people from bands give like guided tours. That's like, instead of having like a docent, like a museum, they're going to have like the guy from Suicidal Tendencies, the girl from L7, the guy from Rancid or whatever. And
CJ Ramon's doing it. You even got a fucking Ramon in there.
Yeah, CJ's doing it. So I'm going to do it too. And it's like basically just like walking around telling like these kinds of stories, like just knowing about these little things and pointing stuff out that other people might not have gotten. So it'll be a unique experience. Like if you get me to give you a tour, it's going to be a different than if you get like Fletcher from Pennywise to give you a tour, you know? So I think it's a cool concept. I mean, Fat Mike's such a fucking genius, man. He's another one. He is just a fucking visionary, you know? I've known him forever too. And just to have the idea, the audacity to go, yeah, there should be a museum for punk rock. But to Mike's credit, he was like, I don't just want it to be punk rock as far as my generation, you know, his generation would define it, which would be like, you know, the 80s and punk rock. He's like, I want to have it, every iteration of what they considered punk rock represented, you know? So he was like, I want all the early 2000s. He's like, I want Sugarcult, Good Charlotte and all, he's like, and then the maybe more recent bands that have been, in the scene, Pierce the Veil and Water Parks, all, and then he wants like going back to like Iggy Pop and the New York Dolls and Velvet Underground and, and then everything in between, obviously, like, the Ramones and the Damned and the Pistols and all that stuff and all the 80s Minor Threat, Black Flag, so on and so forth. And of course, No Effects and Bad Religion and all that stuff too. So it's going to be really cool. I'm looking forward to that.
Literally, I was just, as you were bringing up the punk rock museum, literally the next thing I was going to ask you is you aren't going to be doing one of those tours, are you? Or are you going to be doing tours? That was literally what
I'll be there. They haven't announced me yet. So, but it will be in, I believe, I probably have it in my calendar, but I'm too lazy to look. It's going to be like in late June, early July, something like that. So definitely get on that. It's going to be fun. Book your trip to Vegas.
That is so funny because I also have to tell you, dude, in front of me here, I haven't recorded it yet, but I do monthly rundowns on the podcast. And in news here, I have Punk Rock Museum announces April and May guided tour schedule, which I'm oh, fuck yeah.
So I'll be there June 30th, July 1st, and July 2nd. There you go. You heard it here first.
Go. That is the time you got to go.
News.
You got to get a tour from Marko. That is fucking amazing. That is so rad, man.
I will school you. I will school you on all the tiniest little details of every little thing. You'll trip out.
Man, okay, that is wild. So I mean, there's some cool things going on here. Like, I mean, if you're a fan of Marko, I mean, we got the new Popsicko out. We got you're going to be doing a tour guide at the Punk Rock Museum. I mean, is there anything else going on, like, coming up we should tell people about you're doing? Like, anything else going on in the world of Marko that you want?
Another thing I'm not supposed to talk about is, let's see, what week is it? I'm just going to give you my whole schedule here. Let me just flip through my calendar.
I'm not against it.
I've got to try to change my kid's orthodontist appointment from 2:30 on Tuesday to a different time because they might go snowboarding. Okay, what else do I have to think about? Oh, look, I'm not supposed to talk about this, but I'm going to be the secret surprise guest DJ at Emo Night in Portland, Oregon, not Portland, Maine, because I don't know where you're watching this, in Portland, Oregon. And that will be next Friday, April 7th. So not this Friday, but the week from Friday. So Friday, April 7th at the Holocene in Portland, Oregon. I'm going to be there as your big surprise DJ. And so you can come to that. And then, like I said, the Punk Rock Museum. And then just follow me on Instagram, Marko, Marko, DeSantis, DeSantis, like the asshole in Florida. Fuck. I get to have that name. And now this motherfucker comes along. Anyway, so just follow me on Instagram and DM me. I always reply to my DMs. And I do a lot of DJ gigs. I've got a whole bunch of other shit in the works, but I'll keep you in suspense. But yeah, hopefully some new music coming out. Hopefully some things you can read coming out. But right now I want to get you up to speed. Go back and revisit the Sugarcult catalog.
Nice.
Bouncing Off the Walls, memory. A lot of people don't know our third record, Lights Out, which in my never to be humble opinion is our best record. So go back and rediscover Lights Out. I think it's a great record. Not enough people heard it. And listen and find the playing favorites. Go back and check out Bad Astronaut. Pull yourself up to speed, and then we'll get to some new shit eventually.
And Popsicko, I mean, you have this amazing package too there. I mean, including if you're a vinyl fan or a zine fan. The
Popsicko thing, dude, if you're the type of person like me who wants the limited edition thing, then get that vinyl, like get on that shit now. I hate to be like the hyping salesperson, but like,
no, do it.
The label only pressed up 250 copies, and I doubt they're going to press up more. So, because that's what we said we were going to do, is just a limited run. So you get a book, you get a book and a vinyl record, and I think it's like $25 for the package. So that's a pretty good deal.
A lot.
I mean, a year from now, you'll be able to sell the book for $25. That's just the way collecting shit goes. Like stuff goes up in value when it's in limited quantity. We're not doing it for that reason. We're just doing it because we just don't believe there's more than 250 people out there that want a Popsicko record because no one knows who the fuck we are. But
they're gonna know.
Hear it, I think you're gonna dig it. So check it out. You can even go to Spotify or Apple Music and just listen. I think we have got 4 songs out. So check it out if you like it. It's definitely coming from the heavy influence from Replacements and Soul Asylum and Nirvana and Cheap Trick. And, definitely
bands I love.
That world, but again, we had our own thing. So check it out. Yeah.
Nice. As we close this out, we've touched a lot of ground, but is there anything else we should let them know before we go? Is there anything else we missed?
Dude, honestly, I don't think I've ever covered this much ground in any interview. And I've fucking challenged some podcast hosts that, I'm like, you want to know the story or do you want to know the story? Because I can give you the abbreviated story and just start the clock at Sugarcult. But I think it's much more interesting when someone, that stuff you can Google, this is the stuff that I feel like you're not going to get unless you listen to this podcast,
Exactly. So we're educating people. You're schooling their asses with this right now.
Well, I just I'm interested in this kind of shit. I'll listen to a podcast of an artist I like, and it's fun when I can learn that kind of stuff. So I'm assuming the kind of people that listen to your show are those types of people too. So
yeah, 100%.
So hopefully you got something out of it. Like I said, hit me up on Instagram if you have any questions or whatever. I think we covered pretty much, we covered a lot of ground, and it does give me kind of anxiety when I think about it. I'm like, fuck, I have been playing, played in a lot of different configurations of bands and made a lot of music, but I still feel like I haven't really done shit compared to some of the people out there. I still got a long way to go. So
you literally told us.
I'm telling you my whole story. I'm like, that's all great, and then I remind myself of the Germs, and I'm like, and then you've got Pat Smear, who was in the fucking Germs, and before that was following around the Runaways and going and sneaking into Rodney Bingenheimer's club and hanging out with David Bowie, and then working at a record store for a few years, just chilling. And because he happened to be friends with this chick named Courtney Love, who had been a punk rocker in the scene early, back in the early days, he ends up getting a phone call, or, he ends up looking up Courtney's number because he's in the record store and he sees on the TV on MTV News that something about Nirvana. And he just decided to call Courtney Love and find out if Nirvana needed a guitar player or something like that. It's the way he got in Nirvana is so fucking DIY and crazy. He was literally just called, put it out to Courtney Love. And then she told Kurt Cobain about it. And then he got the number for the record store, because I don't think Pat had his own number, and called him. And again, it was like Chris Rowe with the Ataris with the Vandals. He thought it was his friend fucking with him. He's like, no, you're not the guy from Nirvana. And he called him back. He's like, no, it's really me. Do you want to be in this band? So he ends up in Nirvana, and fucking they're, total fucking Cinderella story. He goes from this dude who used to be in the Germs that was sitting around, at some record store, and ends up in Nirvana. And then, sadly Nirvana ends, and then ends up in the Foo Fighters. And then, and then ends up out of the Foo Fighters, and then gets back in the Foo Fighters. And it's what a story that guy's had. That's a book I want to read. I want Pat Smear to write a book.
To be fair to you, yeah, we can't all be Pat Smear. There's really only one Pat Smear.
But there is only one Pat Smear, and he never does interviews either. He's very, so our buddy Chris that I told you about, that we grew up with, who's obviously in the Foo Fighters, the guitar player. He's another one, dude. I could tell you, talk about people who love music. What he does in his spare time, and he's got a wife and 3 kids. In his spare time, he makes solo records, and he kind of got interested in country music, and he starts making legit sounding Americana kind of country-ish solo records. And he goes out and tours in a van to promote his solo records, and doesn't play any Foo Fighters songs whatsoever. Doesn't even ask to be billed as Chris from the Foo Fighters, and just goes out there and loads his own shit, pulls up at a dive bar, sets up his stuff, plays shows. Like, he just loves music.
That's so rad.
I mean,
that
this
makes
guy
me like
fucking
him.
has the Foo Fighters have a fucking private jet. You know what I mean? And he gets home and just for the hell of it, makes solo records and goes out and tours. You know, he's in England right now playing, doing it.
That he's doing
Dave,
for the love of it.
Also was another fucking great story. You know, he was in Scream and then Nirvana and then, you know, changes instruments and gets the Foo Fighters. He's on any given night, he's out there in the middle of the night, like smoking, you know, doing his own barbecue and then feeding like hundreds of homeless people for free. He just loves the barbecue. So he's like, I'm going to make food for people who don't get to eat food that much. You know, I mean, to me, these are like, you hear about people like that and it just inspires you to just be a radder version of yourself. And you realize like enough of the punk rock kids have grown their tentacles into the mainstream and maybe even made some money. So it's lovely to see shit like that happening, you know?
Yes.
You know, you get Flea from the Chili Peppers, who at one point played in Fear and used to like just be a feral, like fucking practically a runaway kid on Hollywood Boulevard. He makes it in the Chili Peppers and he opens up the Silver Lake Music Conservatory, basically a music school for people who don't have a lot of money, and just like teaches kids in LA how to play music. How fucking cool is that?
Cool.
Like,
it's so fucking cool.
It's like the culture of rock and roll and punk rock is super cool because it's just filled with people that just like kind of pulled something wild off against all odds, and then they usually pay it back, you know, in some way, shape, or form, which is super cool. I do a lot of stuff right now. I teach at a music college. I teach songwriting and music business, and I help a lot of aspiring artists. It's just, you know, it's super fun to just like be immersed in this world of music, you know, in every, as a fan, as a musician, as an artist, whatever you want to say, you know, as just be involved in it. You know, it's a cool thing. I love seeing a guy with a Replacements t-shirt on and an Iron Maiden thing hanging on his wall. You know, you love music when you don't like draw like denominational lines between different genres. It's just like, you know,
this radio show itself.
Guitars.
I mean, this radio show itself. I mean, we play Sugarcult next to a Replacement song. I don't give a fuck. Like, awesome. I'm totally like, break those fucking like, fuck whatever you think of that. It's like, it's all good music.
And I'll give you a trivia question right now. What's the connection between Sugarcult and the Replacements?
Holy shit. Ooh.
Who produced our first record, Start Static?
Wait, was it Matt Wallace?
Matt Wallace, who produced.
Wait, it was Matt Wallace.
Yep.
Oh,
and he
shit.
produced Don't Tell a Soul by the Replacements. And he produced both of Paul Westerberg's solo records.
I didn't realize. I knew all that. I didn't realize Matt Wallace produced Sugarcult. I would have fucking asked you that an hour ago.
Oh, dude. Well, there you go. We'll have to do a follow-up.
Holy shit. Okay.
So there you go.
Well, yeah. with that.
And you already know that I was punishing Matt Wallace with just like, tell me Replacement stories. Tell me again. You know, so the whole time we were making Start Static, I was just punishing Matt Wallace to get him to tell me stories. And let's just say they do not disappoint. Like the Replacements were the real deal, as it turns out.
Everything I've heard from people with them,
it was not. We're a fucking rock and roll band.
Yeah, that was not an act. Of the bands who like it's an act or they put that on. No, that was them. Everything you hear, that was fucking them.
For better or for worse, you know.
Read Trouble Boys. Yeah, read the book. You will find out that band, for good and bad. Like, that was not an act or an image put on by a record label. That was
and the funny thing is, he was telling me stories that were from when he worked on Don't Tell a Soul. So that was already like, you think they had already like gone through their like craziest years, and that was like the mellower side of the Replacement. Not the case. He's like, I'd come to the studio and they would be, you know, they would basically start drinking at 10 in the morning, and then they would start doing cocaine so that they could stay awake to keep drinking. And then, you know, and then they had to do more cocaine in the morning because they had stayed up so late drinking because they had done cocaine to stay up drinking. So it's just like, I don't even know if they ever slept. And then he was like, they were such like working class, blue collar types of kids they would like have an argument, and like, you know, we're in the studio, we're like, okay, well, I can see how you feel. Okay, great. I'm going to give you space to feel that way. I understand that that's how you feel. Like, we're having these like really like California, you know, mature conversations in the studio. Once in a while, one of us loses our temper. The Replacements, no way. He's like, they would have an argument and they'd be like, fuck you. And be like, fuck you. And be like, what are you going to do about it? Let's go. And they would just go outside and start fighting. And literally they would have a fist fight over like a bass part or something. It would be like, you know, they would go outside. Let's go right now. And they'd go out and fight. And whoever won the fight got their way. Like, that's like how that fucking record. So now you go back and listen to Don't Tell a Soul and you're going to go, dude, like some guy fucking lost a tooth for that guitar part, you know?
That solo is in there because
yeah,
he lost
like,
that
there was
solo.
black eyes, there was fucking chipped teeth, there was bloody knuckles, and I mean, it's just insane. It's so crazy.
I mean, they're all-time favorite band. Westerberg is God, so I love these. I love hearing it all.
Man, such a great band. We could go on forever, dude. I could connect the dots through all this shit forever.
Yeah.
Actually, the studio where Popsicko recorded our record Off to a Bad Start, which is the one we were talking about before. I think right before we recorded that record, Tommy Stinson had been in there making the first Friday Night is Killing Me, the first Passion Pop record.
I fucking love that. That is my favorite.
That in our hometown in Santa Barbara. Yeah,
dude,
our singer Keith was like a huge Replacements fan, and he had like hung out with the Replacements. He had all these great stories because, like I said, he was a few years older than me. So he would be like, dude, I got to like party with them at their hotel, and he'd like gone to a bunch of he'd gone to like 12 Replacement shows or something like that.
Shit.
Cool.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
Dude, I mean, Marko,
we probably got to go.
Yeah, we are. So, I mean, again, check out the new Popsicko. Go on there, give Marko a follow. Keep up with it. Again, you got a punk rock museum. You'll be doing that. There's more than enough to stay connected with Marko, and there's enough. Go back in the back catalog too. There's a lot to get into.
Yeah,
so
check it all out, man. And you know, you can find me on the Instagram, and then also I always forget to tell people about this. It's kind of lame, but it's also kind of cool. Is this thing called Cameo, where you can you can find me on Cameo, and lots of times people will like. You know, ask me to show them how to play a part on a song, or just like, you know, I could do the typical thing where I give you like, you know, happy birthday to your friend or something like that, whatever. Some guy asked me to give advice to his kid who wanted to play guitar. And I like, you know, but lots of times people also will send me music to listen to that they're working on, and I'll give you like a critique of it. So like, you know, make use of that. It's like $20 or something like that. I think my battery's going to run out on my computer. Dude, we pulled it off. We did the longest podcast of all time. We ran out the battery on a fucking MacBook Pro. That's how long we went.
We're fucking pros, man. No, I will.
I'm waiting for you to say the word, dude. I'm not going to stop.
I am. Check it. I mean, again, we got Cameo. We got all the new music, all of it. We're going to go before his battery dies. I'm Anthony Merchant talking to Marko DeSantis. A great fucking time right here on the Power Chord Hour.